This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 4 minutes after 10. Vinny's already been in touch. Did you overshoot your jingle? He asks. No, Vinny, it's just the way I'm sitting. But let me refer you briefly, if I may, to a news story from May of 2023, which you may find pertinent to today's coverage of the very sad news regarding that Vauxhall plant in Luton. I'll say that again, May 2023, nothing but sympathy, still, contempt for the conmen. Compassion for the for the car workers affected, or the van workers affected. But here is a story, as I say, from about 18 months ago. One of the world's biggest car makers has warned that it may have to close UK factories if the government does not renegotiate the Brexit deal. Stellantis, which owns Vauxhall, Peugeot, Citroën and Fiat, had committed to making electric cars in the UK, but says that is under threat. It warned it could face I could go on, right? But hey-ho, let's not mention that, eh? In much of the coverage that I've seen today. Let's not mention the fact that the company closing a factory warned 18 months ago that it would probably have to close a factory as a direct consequence of the Brexit deal negotiated by David Frost. Go and sign some petition instead, calling upon the only Prime Minister in the last 5 to have actually been delivered Downing Street by a general election on his first time round. It's extraordinary, isn't it? The way that these con men, these absolute shysters, these charlatans, in the case of Donald Trump, these rape apologists, constantly just trying to break new things and direct attention towards new distractions. People are losing their jobs in Luton as a direct consequence, if Vauxhall themselves are to be believed, of Brexit, of the ludicrous so-called deal that Boris Johnson passed off on a pliant nation as some sort of achievement. But don't worry about that. And whatever you do, also don't worry about the fishermen in Brixham, whose MP stood up in the House of Commons yesterday to describe the absolute sense of betrayal that they all feel. One of them saying Farage stood in our harbours, pint in hand, and lied through his teeth. Where is he now? But don't talk about that. Don't stick that in your news. Don't put that on the front page. Why would you? When there is absolute gibberish to be covering instead. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. We're not going to talk about that today. I felt I say that. It's 6 minutes after 10 and I need to get started on my proper introduction by 8 minutes past. Otherwise, history has taught me, because you're a creature of habit. You don't realise this when you're listening to me in the morning. You're a creature of habit. If I mix it up too much, then you don't know how to respond. Did you know this? If I mix it up too much, so yesterday, was it yesterday? I got to the 1:15 and I said, I'll come back after the junction and tell you the rest of that story. That didn't work initially because you were thinking, hang on a minute, when we come back after the junction, that's when we start ringing him. But I said, don't ring me. So you didn't. And yet I wanted you to. I've got to stop messing with the formula like this. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I've got another 40 seconds to tell you I felt the vaguest stirrings of a contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned conversation, because I feel mostly sympathy for these fishermen and women who have been lied to by Farage and Johnson and Rees-Mogg and Hannan and the rest of them. And I feel nothing but sympathy for the Vauxhall workers who may or may not have voted to impose economic sanctions or indeed for their own redundancies. But I don't know if there's a phone-in it yet. I don't actually want to hear from people indulging schadenfreude or saying they deserve it, it serves them right, because I truly, truly don't believe that. So I just thought I'd keep you in the loop. I can feel that story building in momentum, but given that this is probably the only place in the UK media that would cover it honestly and clearly, I sometimes need a little bit of encouragement to do so. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. I don't know how to, well, I do know how to approach this story, but I don't know what I think. As a young person, as a boy and as a young man, when I felt my opinions beginning to form, I don't know if this will be a huge surprise to anybody kind enough to listen on a vaguely regular basis, but an awful lot of my positions on issues of public policy or ethics were informed by my religion. I was raised very much a Catholic. I was taught by nuns until the age of 7 and by monks from 13 to 18. And it never really lets you go. I have over the years derived enormous comfort from religious faith. And like many people, my religious faith, or like many thoughtful people, my religious faith has come and gone. and come again and gone again. At times it has been of a crucial comfort to me, and at other times it's been something that intellectually I'm completely unable to sustain. And that is why the conversation now about the assisted dying bill and the role that religion will play in the decisions of some MPs on how to vote absolutely fascinates me. And the reason why it fascinates me is because I can see it with uncommon clarity. I can see both sides of the argument with uncommon clarity. A belief in an unprovable being should in no way inform what you do or how you exercise your power to allow people living in unbearable agony to curtail their existence early. That would be argument number one. Argument number two is, if you believe that every life on this planet was created by your God, then how on earth could you use your political power to allow people to supersede his or her divine authority and end their own lives when that decision should rest entirely in God's hands? Those are the 2 points. Those, I think they are. And listen, the phone lines are already open. 0345 6060 973. Those, I think, are the two extremes. I don't care what your religious beliefs are. I'm a great supporter of freedom of religion. I suppose there's an even more extreme position than that, where you're not a great supporter of freedom of religion, but that would make you Pol Pot. So, but you cannot impose them on anybody else. And if they are going to inform your decision about the lives of millions of people who don't share your faith, then I think you should give your head a wobble. I think you should try to base your argument entirely upon medical advice and intellectual number crunching. And then we scoot across again to the other extreme, where you have to accuse anybody who claims to believe in God, that is intending to vote against, or I beg your pardon, in favour of the assisted dying bill, of weapons-grade hypocrisy. And when it comes to weapons-grade hypocrisy, I know of what I speak. As a young person, I was, as a consequence of Catholic, and I would use the word indoctrination, I was persuaded that abortion was wrong. I mean, I really struggled with the idea that contraception was against the will of God. But for the first 16 or so years of my life, it wasn't really a particularly live issue for me. And then later, and this was trickier. Well, I say it was trickier. Later, when we discovered that we were going to struggle to have children naturally, my very carefully nurtured religious objections to IVF, because I know this comes as a surprise. I honestly believed that man had no business meddling in God's affairs. Don't laugh at me, because this is a sincerely held religious view that many people still hold. I believe that man had no business meddling in God's affairs. Then I should have been ethically opposed to fertility treatment, to IVF. It is God's will. And remember, I was adopted as well. So my dad, who was a very devout Catholic, sort of accepted God's will, and IVF wasn't really an option in 1972, but he thought it was God's plan for me and my sister to be given to mum and dad. So that's who I was. And then suddenly life hits you round the back of the head, and you find that your faith is not as deep as you thought it was, or, and this would be the more generous interpretation of the facts, or that your intellect overtakes your capacity to believe in an unprovable power. So Lord Falconer, a former Lord Chancellor, has gone after the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, in fairly passionate manner, insisting that her religious views shouldn't be imposed on everyone else. And yet, as Matthew Parris points out rather winningly in the Times today, all new laws impose the lawmakers' views on everyone else. Lawmakers are entitled to consult their own consciences before they vote. And she has argued that her Muslim faith prevents her from voting in favour of assisted dying. Her Muslim beliefs prevent her. I would say that the same should probably apply to any honest Catholic with a large C. Any honest Christian, actually. If you really believe that God made you, you do not have the right to break that contract. And that's why I think Matthew Paris describes Mahmoud's declaration as brave or as admirable, because she is being open about her religious motivation. As he says, most of the opponents of the bill who are motivated by their religion are shy of saying so, are reluctant to say so. So what's the question? Should individual MPs, there's two questions here. Should individual MPs, when they're making a decision about your life or your mum's life, I want you to think about this. This is really important. I know we've done a lot on assisted dying, and some ways into the conversation have been more successful than others, but this is a profoundly important one. I know that we're not a very religious society anymore. We're much less religious than we were when I was growing up, and that is probably in many ways for the better. But this is really important because, religious faith is an incredibly powerful engine of human behavior, not just at an individual level, but, wars have been fought. Wars are still being fought over religion per se and religious beliefs themselves. So there are politicians who hold religious beliefs, and those religious beliefs are going to be activated when they make a decision about your life or your death or your grandma's life or your grandma's death. Politicians are going to deploy, when consulting their conscience, their belief in an unprovable entity as a grounds for denying you the right to end your life, or your mum the right to end her life when that life in her mind, in your mind, becomes unbearable. I want to know whether you think that's fair and right. I don't know that there's a great deal we can do about it, but I find myself, despite not agreeing with Shabana Mahmood, although as I've explained, I think once I would have done, I find myself thinking that it's a good thing for people to consult something that they believe to be bigger than themselves. But I feel it, I'd hate to say this, given that we started with the comments about Vauxhall and fishermen in Brixham. I'm about 52-48 on this. And I can feel my pendulum swinging as I speak. Because the other question, of course, is, can anyone, and this is the one I want people of faith to have a crack at, can anyone who claims to believe in God, in any conventional sense, and it may be that you can educate me about other faiths or other strands of belief, but certainly in the context of all the biggies, all the major religions, certainly all the Abrahamic religions, so Christianity, Islam, Judaism, if you honestly believe in God, or if you claim to believe in God, and remember, most politicians do. It's a bit like wearing a poppy. It's something you do without necessarily thinking too deeply about it. But most politicians claim to believe in God. If you truly believe in God, and this is a question about you, not about the politicians, then can you, in all conscience, be in favour of assisted dying? Suicide was a sin. People who committed suicide could not be buried in consecrated ground. I don't know whether that's still true or not, but the reason behind it, God, here comes my O-level religious education, which I haven't consulted for a very long time, at least not consciously. The reason behind it was that an act of suicide is an act of heresy. You are denying God's will. God decides when you are born. God decides if you are born. God decides when you die. I started thinking about people who've had no religious instruction at all in their lives, listening to this and thinking that I've taken complete leave of my senses. But this was a completely commonplace curriculum just 40 years ago in this country. So if you believe in God, how can you also believe in assisted dying? 0345 6060 973. And do you want politicians to bring their religion to the lobby on Friday? Do you want tell me why you think they shouldn't? 0345 6060 973, and tell me why you think they should. Okay? Because I'm not sure. I think. It's always a slight worry when you begin a logical construct with that phrase. I think it's generally for the good. But I suspect most people who have a a loose faith, a light faith, a comforting faith that they don't spend an awful amount of time examining, I suspect we are also broadly in favour of assisted dying. I think. 2 questions there. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I mean, the role that religion should play in the personal pontifications of politicians. That's your alliteration for the day, isn't it? The personal pontifications of politicians. It's 90 minutes after 10. Give me a ring on this one. But have a think first, because it's not black and white, is it?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 21 minutes after 10. It's religion and politics meeting head on. And listen, I'm always honest with you. I come from a place of cautious warmth towards a politician who has declared that her religious beliefs inform her opposition to the assisted dying bill. And I say that while being free to oppose her, while being free to disagree with her. But why should religious beliefs be... I look at what some people believe. About the same number of people that have signed this hilarious petition believe that the earth is flat. If someone is taking their belief that the earth is flat into a vote on, anything really, they should probably be stopped at the door. So anyway, your thoughts, enough of mine. Barbara's in Havant. Barbara, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello, Barbara. Lovely to hear your voice.
Thank you. Just to state my position, I'm a total atheist from a Jewish background.
Yes.
So with regards to the MPs, I am comfortable with them stating their religious position on the issue of assisted dying, because for me, their religion is one of many manifestations of a spiritual aspect, and one that would, as an issue of spirituality, deal with the incredibly important issue of the meaning of life.
Yes.
I'm an atheist, and for me, that's a big issue. What does it mean? How am I connected to the rest of the manifestations of life, etc., etc.? So I would be I think we're on a very tricky path, and we're already on that path, to just treating the issue as if it were a matter of, in its grossest form, pounds, shillings or pence, or just purely medical evidence, because there are very deep spiritual issues concerning what is the meaning of life, what is the meaning of pain, suffering, etc.
And you can have a relationship with those questions of morality, questions of the meaning of life, without having any religious faith.
Precisely. And I think these are issues that need to be brought into the issue of assisted dying. Otherwise, we go further down what is a very materialistic, pragmatic approach. And I think we go down it to our peril.
What about the hypocrisy angle? Let me pass the buck on this to Matthew Paris, who says, if I am minded to secure a place in paradise and also believe assisting suicide to be a mortal sin in the eyes of God, I should equally declare this before arguing against the practice.
Yes, I think honesty on your position is very
But
worthy.
if you truly believe in God, can you be in good conscience in favour of this legislation?
I wouldn't know, because I don't believe in God.
Come on, I believe in the tooth fairy, but I've got opinions.
I think not.
No.
Personally, I don't think you can.
No, I don't either.
That people struggle with that. That is an inevitable struggle of believing in a God that has given you life and under whose authority you're not allowed to take that life. I get, and that must be a very tricky struggle. But of course, God, in his various manifestations, you would hope, does not want people to suffer. He's supposed to be all-loving.
Exactly. And also, what if the vote goes in one direction and you want to argue from a religious perspective that proves it's God's will? Because if God wanted it to go in... I'm only giggling because this is the kind of debate I used to have as a sixth former. Then that proves that God wanted it to go that way, at which point one of the monks at my school would go, yes, O'Brien, you're overlooking the role of Satan. And I'd say, I often do, sir. I often do. Thank you, Barbara. Liz is in Hertford. Liz, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
What I wanted to say is that it's absolutely fine for MPs to have their religious views, But what I've seen in participating in this debate is that they're not honest about it. So what I see happening is they're picking apart the legislation. We haven't got enough time. The safeguards aren't strong enough.
Yes.
Fundamentally, these people are against this happening. And if they just say that, the safeguards are never going to be enough, are they? Because they don't want this law to happen.
Well, in some cases, I think that will definitely be true. In some cases, I don't think it is, and I shall tell you briefly why. I saw some polling yesterday, and I should dig it out again to check its provenance, but I think the central thrust of it would be true, is that a large proportion of the population is in favour of assisted dying legislation in principle, but when it is explained to them in detail what the current legislation would deliver, that support drops rapidly. So there are meaningful and genuine objections to the legislation in its current form. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that some of the people who speak out against it are not saying my position is based upon my belief in what some people choose to describe as a sky fairy.
Correct. And it's really difficult to listen to because actually when you drill down into the facts there, and when you drill down into the data about people attending church or a religious element regularly, it's 5% of the population. This isn't reflective of the population as a whole. And
often the people who claim to be devout, particularly I keep an eye on the Catholics, because ridiculously, I made some list a few years ago, the most prominent Catholics in the country, and on the opposite page to me was Jacob Rees-Mogg, who doesn't seem to have read the bits in the Bible about what we should do with poor people. But I guess that's between him and his father confessor. So that's why I think you're on the same page as Matthew Parris. That's why he applauds or admires Shabana Mahmood, because she's come out and said that's where I'm coming from.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's much more comfortable than picking apart something that you're never going to agree with from a morality perspective. And that's the great thing about this country, isn't it?
Yes.
You can have your opinions and your views, great, but don't disguise them as something else.
Yeah. And can I ask what your view is on the legislation? I think I know, but just for clarification, you don't have to tell me.
James, my brother had an assisted death in Australia.
Well, that doesn't actually answer my question.
But he was a big fan of yours.
Oh, well,
so he'd be delighted.
Okay.
But yeah, so I am pro this because it was right for him. It was his choice. And he, at the end of his life, was so relieved that he could have the last word.
Oh, wow. And no wonder he was a fan of mine.
But yeah, I mean, I was there and it was right for him and our family.
And of course, that makes your objections really poignant, doesn't it? Or it makes your contribution to this conversation really poignant, because people are not prepared to own the roots of their opinion because they know that it would make their opinion look shakier.
And I think people, James, that have really strong opinions against this haven't been through what some of the people have been through that are supporting this. I'm part of the campaign now for this because I've seen what a difference this made to our family and to my brother and to his young children.
Yes.
And the people I go to campaign with are people that have watched a loved one die in an awful, awful way that's begged them to end it. And you know what? Like most people, until you've participated, your view isn't wholly formed.
And yet that is, in many ways, the opposite of religion. You know, the idea that you have to have personal experience of something before you form an opinion of it is for good or for ill, the polar opposite of what religious doctrines are designed to do. Liz, what an incredible call. Thank you. I'm so sorry for your loss, but I'm glad that it appears to have unfolded in a way that your brother would have wanted and that made life and death considerably easier for the remaining family. That's fantastic. It's fantastically powerful. It's coming up to 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that maybe it's just the sort of nature of the beast. Not that beast, not the one I used to forget about when I was having debates about God's will with monks at my school, but the idea that you respect people's right. The more you respect people's rights, the more you respect their right to disagree with you, but you wish they respected you enough to tell you why. You can't come out with manufactured objections to something when really you're just frightened of saying out loud, I'm opposed to this because God told me to be. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:33. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The relationship between religion and politics. I mean, it used to be absolute, didn't it? I know that the divine right of kings, or Charles I's belief that he governed by God's will, and Oliver Cromwell's contention that things weren't quite that straightforward. But of course, the Puritans believed that they were doing God's will as well. Mary Tudor killed lots of Protestants because they were the wrong kind of Christian, and then her sister came to the throne and killed lots of Catholics because they were the wrong kind of Christian. So, I mean, the relationship between religion and politics is a long and bloody saga. So in a way, I suppose we should be grateful that we're not discussing it at the end of a sword or on the top of a pyre. But no one's had a crack at this one yet. No one who is religious, but who is also in favour of assisted dying. Because I think, and listen, everyone who's ever had religious faith lives with hypocrisy. It's a little bit like the spiritual equivalent of that line that wonderful police officer told us during lockdown when she said, everyone loves the police until they're the ones being policed. It's similar to that. You know, you hold these religious beliefs until your daughter gets pregnant, at which point you suddenly recognise the importance of bodily autonomy and abortion. Great line on social media saying, if you are opposed to abortion as a man, get a vasectomy. It's pretty straightforward. I, again, appreciate stuff isn't that simple. With me, IVF, which I had been taught was wrong because it went against God's will. And then when we confronted infertility, God's will disappeared. God's will left the building immediately. So was I a hypocrite then, or was I a hypocrite before? Because I felt I somehow had the right to tell other people what to do or to pronounce upon these matters. So I put it like that. You're thinking, well, hang on a minute. Why are people getting involved, letting their religion get involved in this kind of thing? But if you are religious, you can't turn it off. And therefore you should say that your position is informed by your religion. 0345 606 0973. John's in Westside. John, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I always get mad nervous waiting on the phone to you, James.
It's only me.
I just wanted to say that, yeah, that's what makes me nervous. What I wanted to say was just that I think the thing that's been discussed here for me is that the difference between faith and religion. Do you know what I mean? I believe in God. You know, I've been all in the wilderness. I was raised a Catholic, but thought myself an atheist for many years, and kind of recently come back to like have a God of my own understanding, as it were. You know?
Have you?
Yeah.
Can I ask why? Just out of curiosity. You don't have to tell me, and you may not know. So God moves in mysterious ways, doesn't he, John?
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, like Catholic upbringing. I know, I didn't have a great experience with certain people in the priesthood and the way I was raised. So I kind of turned my back on religion and kind of became very anti. I was anybody who had faith, I used to laugh at and dismiss and just condescend to.
I think I went through that phase as well, somewhat embarrassingly.
Yeah, and then I kind of just had a crisis, mental health crisis and, addiction crisis, basically. And in that process of recovering myself from that, it was posed to me that I would have to have some kind of faith or a power beyond myself to restore me to health. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
And I was out in the wilderness. I couldn't do it, but somebody just explained to me very easy that it was just something of my own understanding. Do you know what I mean? And I think when it comes to religion, I don't agree with many of the tenets of religion because it's man's interpretation of what
and that's the difference between our upbringings and where you are now, isn't it? Is interpretation as opposed to just a sort of a sense or a spiritual feeling, not the doctrine, not the teachings, not the orders, not the rules, not the regulations, not the imposition from above of a set of values that you're not encouraged to think about. You're just encouraged to follow. So, which brings us to assisted dying. Yeah.
Well, like I have personal experience of suicide in my life. My eldest daughter, her mum took her own life, 2019. And I respect her decision to do that. I respect her decision because I think that your autonomy of your, God's will, man. God gave man free will according to a lot of the Christian religions and. You have the choice to do.
You're going to bring Christianity into it. I'm going to bring the Ten Commandments into it. Thou shalt not kill. And assisted dying involves someone assisting, i.e. breaking the Ten.
That's man's interpretation, though, isn't it, James? That's the thing. The Ten Commandments are Moses' interpretations of the messages that he had from a burning bush away up on a mountain. You know what I mean?
I mean, I'm not here to argue with you about whether but they're not Moses' interpretation. They're not Moses' interpretation. They come ex cathedra. They are the voice of God.
Says a man.
Yeah, it says a man, but I mean, you mentioned Christianity. If you're going to bring Christianity into it, then the most fundamental tenet before all the interpretation starts is going to be the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, but
Says a man.
I just had a cursory look before I came online about whether or not, if the Bible, what the Bible thinks about suicide, and it doesn't consider it an original sin. And the thing that I read is that it hints that life is sacrosanct and God has given life. So the interpretation from that then, because if we're not going Abrahamic there, if we're talking the Christianity version of it.
Yeah, and that God will help you deal with all of your problems and all of your travails. It does not translate into God would object to you ending that. I just need, and this isn't a criticism of you by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of people are
right either, man. Do you know what I mean? I don't.
A lot of people are uncomfortable with the conflation of suicide and assisted dying. Because assisted dying,
yes,
and this is very relevant to the religious angle. Assisted dying, of course, is contingent upon the idea of life having become unbearable, medically unbearable, and 6 months of diagnosis and terminal illness being in place. That's the current legislation as it stands. So it's a very different debate about the religious righteousness.
For some people, their illness is mental torture.
Exactly.
Is an unbearable ability to live mentally. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And this is where my reservations come from, actually, about the legislation as it currently stands. I don't know that it goes far enough in some areas, and I worry that if it did seep into the arena of mental health, as it may well do in the future, then that is a more reversible condition than a lot of the physical terminal illnesses that we hear about. And so that's why when people are told what the detail of the legislation contains, they find their support for the idea diminishes. I'm in favour of the idea, but I didn't know about that, and I didn't know about this. But broadly speaking, if you believe in God through any conventional interpretation of religion, Abrahamic religions in particular, then you can't really vote for assisted dying legislation with an entirely clear conscience. I just think that's an uncomfortable truth, but I wouldn't for a minute consider it to be a disqualifying factor from public life. John, thank you. Pam's in Canvey Island. Pam, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello.
I'm just coming from the perspective that I am a Christian, and I was saying to your lady before, I genuinely don't think you can separate the two. If you truly believe, it's going to shape your opinions, it's going to shape how you view things. And as you've just said, it is something that God says no to because of the preciousness of life. But as a younger person and into my middle age, I would describe myself as perhaps a very naive Christian.
Right.
Because life was very good for me, and like you said a bit earlier on, then life hits you around the back of the head.
Yes.
And my husband became very ill and suffered for 3+ years.
Okay, I'm sorry.
He was super brave. I loved him even more for that. So obviously then you start thinking, you start engaging your brain a bit more, and so I do wrestle with these issues as a Christian, because I know in the real life it's not black and white. No. And it's difficult. It's really difficult. But if you are a Christian, you can't really pick a mix. You've got to...
You're lovely, because it makes you uncomfortable saying that, doesn't it? Even though you know it's true.
Yeah.
I get that. That's the thing about faith. It's a mad old business, isn't it? In the way that you can't really argue with what it asks of you. But that doesn't mean it's easy to do it.
No. And having gone through that journey with John,
yes,
you can't deny that you wouldn't want people to suffer. And I don't get me wrong, I never, ever fought tirelessly to keep him going, if you see what I mean.
Of course I do.
But I can understand why other people would want that option.
Yes.
If I haven't got a faith, I understand it completely. So it becomes not black and white.
No, you're right.
But
and
as a Christian,
yeah,
that's I genuinely believe I cannot pick and mix.
Well, assisting suicide.
It all falls apart, doesn't it? It all falls apart.
Yes, I think it. Well, I mean, it is. This is a bit literal. This bit is black and white. Assisting suicide would be a mortal sin in the eyes of God, and therefore, any politician who is motivated by that sort of belief should say so, shouldn't they?
Absolutely, and I don't think there's anything wrong in being honest and saying, well, this is who I am, because if you are a true, I don't even like that expression, true believer, but if you live your life like, if you walk the walk, talk the talk, whatever, it's who you are, it's who you become, because it shapes everything about you.
Beautifully put, Pam. Thank you. And no, I really mean that. That's really helpful. You've put it a lot better than I could do, because your faith is strong. And that's the point. It's not easy. It's not supposed to be easy. The Christian church in particular bears very, very little resemblance in 2024 to the path that Jesus preached 2,000 years ago. And Pam is describing how almost impossible it is to actually walk that path, as Rory points out. By the metrics you've just put forward, James, then a truly Christian MP shouldn't ever vote to bomb a country or to supply a country to bomb another. You're absolutely right. And St. Augustine is probably the starting point for a conversation about when a war is just or whether a war is just. But if Jesus was around, I think we're all pretty clear about where he'd sit on most of these issues. He'd be a pacifist. He'd probably be a member of Just Stop Oil, but let's not open that particular box of frogs. But he would be a pacifist. He'd be the sort of pacifist that gets attacked on Poppy Day for not wanting to celebrate or commemorate any form of war or carnage. But don't at me on this. I don't have the qualifications and I haven't got the dog collar.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:48. I mean, this is a little bit dry, but it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, and I can feel the hobby horse getting bigger. Can you do that with a metaphor? Can hobby horses get bigger? I used to be a hobby Shetland, and now it's a hobby cart horse. But all these people who keep talking about small government and small state, that's going to be one of the next big things, isn't it? They've broken Brexit. They've brought Liz Truss into Downing Street. They've screwed manufacturing. They've knackered the NHS. All they do is, we're going to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, down with NATO. It's all they do is break things. A petition abroad at the moment, just calling more breaking of things. I don't understand anything, but I'm very cross and I demand that you do what I want, which of course leads us back to the Vauxhall workers who possibly voted to scupper their own employer, or indeed the fishermen down in Brixham, whose MP was doing a sterling work on their behalf, despite the fact that many of them, thanks to Nigel Farage, of course, voted for their own decline. But Eric Pickles, do you remember him? Apologies if you'd managed to forget him, and I've just brought him back into your... But he was one of these people who was always banging on about small government. So back in the day when he was in power, I think in about 2012, he gleefully, and he wrote very floridly about how delighted he was to be abolishing something called the Audit Commission, which was a state-run body, so you see, small state versus big state, responsible for auditing the accounts of local authorities. He wrote at the time about when the spaceship arrives from Alpha Centauri, that's what he said, I know that it's Centauri, and lands in the middle of Barnsley and goes up to number 23 Acacia Avenue, and the Spaceling says to the lady that answers the door, "Take me to your leader," she would say, "I'm in charge, localism is in charge." So this is Eric Pickles speaking about trying to cut down the size of the government. "I fully accept," he said, "that I have had great fun abolishing lots of stuff. It's been nice to see the steam coming out of the Labour Party's ears, but I wasn't doing it just to get steamy." There's an image nobody wanted in their minds. When it was pointed out by another MP that the commission, the Audit Commission, had become somewhat sclerotic, that it had become somewhat top-heavy and burdensome, do you know what Michael Heseltine said? Change the chairman. It's no more complicated than that. But this sort of small statist ideology, embodied on this occasion by Eric Pickles, abolished it instead. So guess what happened yesterday, 10 years later? Yeah, the National Audit Office has refused to sign off government accounts because of the massive auditing backlog. So because councils can no longer have this body through which to audit their accounts. The backlog has become so huge that the UK spending watchdog is refusing to sign off the government's public sector accounts for the first time. And I quote from the Financial Times, because of the huge number of local authorities that failed to provide audited accounts. Eric Pickles, I haven't checked. I put my house on it. Is in the House of Lords. Is he in the Keith? Can we check? Is he in the House of Lords? Because I don't want to actually give my house to anyone. Luckily, I don't think anyone took the bet. But he'll be in the House of Lords. Daniel Hannan is in the House of Lords. David Frost is in the House of Lords. A couple of 12-year-olds who work for Boris Johnson are in the House of Lords. So the idea that Eric Pickles wouldn't have got into the House of Lords is a little fanciful. Back to religion, politics, and the assisted dying legislation, what the relationship between those three entities should be. Rebecca is in Hereford. Rebecca, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning.
Hello.
I'm an NHS nurse with 20 years of experience. I am pro-assisted dying because I believe that if somebody has capacity,
yes,
like with all other aspects of medicine, they should be able to make an informed decision. With regards to religion and politics, if only 5% of the country are religious, and actually religion has no basis to influence this decision through Parliament.
Where does that figure come from? Just out of interest.
Did you suggest that only 5%?
It wasn't me. I think one of the callers may have said only 5 go to church or go to worship, places of worship. But I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't take that as gospel, if you pardon the pun.
I believe that actually you should make a decision that is not biased by religion. In order to make a truly kind of unbiased judgment on something as important as this legislation, you need to be able to do so without your pre-existing religious opinions having too strong an influence, because actually you're representing.
But as Pam in Canvey Island explained, you simply can't. I mean, your faith is, and just to be clear, in 2021, 46.2% of the population of England and Wales identified as Christian. And only 37.2% identified as no religion. So that sticks a bit of a stick in your spokes, but not necessarily a fatal one. The point is, I think, and Pam made it much better than I can, that the religious faith involves doing things that you don't want to do because you believe it's what God wants you to do. So you can't then say, well, I better not do this, even though God wants me to do it. And that's not a powerful argument against what you're saying. It's a simple explanation of the people that you're up against.
I would suggest then that you sit out of a decision that is against, you declare it, and you say, actually, I cannot be part of making a decision that is so fundamentally important because of my religious, beliefs. And that's, similar to what doctors can do. They can conscientiously object to being part of abortions because they are against their religious. So if you're asked to vote on something that you are fundamentally against, then you declare it and you sit out.
But it's not quite the same. I mean, opting out of helping someone to end their life is very different from opting out of a vote. I mean, all politicians call upon their consciences to arrive at their decision. And I think a world in which there is no religion, or in which every conscience is framed in a vacuum of spiritual beliefs, is just an impossibility. Look, people believe some really crazy things, and they get to vote on everything. So why should religious beliefs, which are generally, in their purest form at least, a force for good, why should that exclude people from putting forward their case and indeed voting accordingly?
They have some very, very, very strict guidelines that not all people share. And actually, I'm fundamentally against somebody who holds, religious beliefs.
So should a vegetarian politician be able to vote on farming policy?
A difficult question.
No, it's not, is it?
I think if you're casting a vote, your vote should be unbiased.
But you're talking about. But this is. I mean, maybe nurses shouldn't be allowed to vote. Maybe people with medical experience shouldn't be able to vote on this because it's a moral dimension that we're examining. You could flip it on its head. What you're saying is that people who I don't agree with shouldn't be allowed to vote. You sound like Donald Trump, Rebecca.
Thank you. Have a good day.
It's 10:55. And I would stress, I think that there was a majority of medical professionals who are in favour of it, but a majority of palliative care professionals who are opposed, which I think is also really interesting. Tim's in Belfast. Tim, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. First of all, I'd like to, having grown up in Northern Ireland since 1958, I would challenge your view that religion generally is for the good.
Well, listen, Buster, I said in its purest form before it had become corrupted by inadequate individual, in its purest form, like just the Gospels, for example.
Yes, we don't actually have daily arguments about transubstantiation, although it might appear so.
Yes.
But the thing about faith, which I've always found, and really I gave up faith in religion when I was about 15 because of living here.
Sure, yes.
And the thing that gets me is the imposition of faith. And whenever you suddenly have politicians pulling the faith card out of their pockets whenever it suits them.
Yeah.
And I have absolutely no objection to anybody having any faith about anything, to be quite honest, as long as they don't try and impose it on me. And this is what is happening in a political situation where suddenly we're seeing this. And I want to have that choice. And I don't want somebody who believes in God or believes in whatever they believe in to tell me that I can't have that choice because of their beliefs. Because as an atheist, and we are coming out of the closet now, it's interesting, I've noticed in the last few years people of my age who are now saying that they're atheists, whereas in the past we always felt that was almost like an admission of...
That's why I drew the parallel with the poppy, actually. That's why I drew the parallel with the poppy. It's as if you kind of feel you can't publicly behave in any way different from the accepted norm.
Exactly. And now I'm meeting people, as I say, we're all in our 60s, people I don't know, and we're chatting about things, and atheism is now an accepted form. But we're never considered. We're not discussed in this group. And it's interesting you say about all the MPs who say they believe in God. Well, they're not representing the country if that's the case. But whenever somebody starts to impose anything on me like that, which is a case of moral choice, and I've seen both my parents pass away, neither of whom were happy over their last period of their lives.
Right.
And my father-in-law recently passed away and was very uncomfortable over the last period of his life. I wouldn't be saying to them, I'm going to impose my decision.
But is there a difference? Is there a difference? I mean, I alluded to Pol Pot about an hour ago in a slightly light-hearted fashion, but actually, you highlight the difference between a democracy that contains people of faith, or even a legislature, a voting body that contains people of faith and people of no faith, and people of some faith and people of lots of faith, and a dictator or a monarch or an emperor who can impose. But it's a vote. So if you hold these views as a consequence of your faith, your religious beliefs, you can't tell them not to vote. Well, you could, like the last lady suggested, that you sit it out. But that's why I think Shabana Mahmood deserves admiration for being upfront about where she's coming from.
Yeah, but you're not elected on the basis of faith. I mean, you are in Northern Ireland, but in the rest of the United
you beat me to it there, Tim.
the rest of the United Kingdom, you're not elected on the basis of faith, and you don't put this forward as to the electorate as to elect you on that basis. But the point, so then it becomes a free vote, which it is, which means it's not party political, it's not manifesto driven. It's then people imposing their faith and not giving me the choice to not have their faith. It's a bit like a minister standing in a church saying you will do this and you will do that. I don't want that. I don't want anyone in any church telling me what to do. I don't agree with religion.
So then, to bring it down to the individual case, what do you want an MP who sincerely believes that this is bad legislation because of their religious beliefs? What do you want them to do?
I want them to park their religious beliefs in this choice and represent the people that elected them.
But they never do that. Then we don't need MPs. We just have bloody referendums and opinion polls all the time.
But if we have a free vote, we have a situation whereby they are allowed. A
free vote means you can bring your religious convictions to the lobby.
Or else you could decide not to.
I think it's possible that we haven't solved this riddle in the course of the last hour.
We haven't.
And that's the nature of an unknowable supreme being, or perhaps just the nature of engaging phone-in radio. Tim, thank you. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Isn't it that religion and politics, as I mentioned at the top of the show today, used to be the two topics you were always cautioned against discussing around a dinner table. Steer clear of religion and politics, you'll be absolutely fine. You bring religion and politics nowhere more so, in fact, than in Northern Ireland, where Tim was calling from a moment ago, into a conversation, and division will quickly follow. Division and possible verbal violence will quickly follow. What are the modern subjects that speak to similar dividing lines. If I had to pick two, well, class would make the list, wouldn't it? So if I had to pick 5, then 2 of them would definitely be food and work. I've been increasingly obsessed, and after 4 or 5 near misses, we finally, in the last week, got into the heart of the conversations about worklessness. Thanks to you. I've always said if I'm not getting the calls I want, it's because I'm doing something wrong at this end of the phone line, and that's, I've got this terrible stubbornness. If I think the subject is important enough, that I'll stick with it. But food is the other one. Work and food. Our relationship with food, our diets. We have these funny little moments that feel quite profound, don't they? They feel quite significant. Like when we saw, I know I go on about this, but that's what a penny drop moment is. When we saw the menu of the school child in France and what they were eating every week, and we compared it to A, what English or British school children are getting, and B, what happened to Jamie Oliver when he tried to wean a generation of children off turkey Twizzlers. He ended up getting lampooned and attacked and accused of all manner of miscreancy, up to and including the mothers who were sort of poking hot dogs through the chain link fence of their children's school because they were worried that they were eating too much healthy stuff. So there's a story about that in the news today. Pandemic junk food diets are behind a generation of unruly children. And this comes from Tim Spector, the professor of epidemiology, but also the founder of Zoe, which is a business helping people choose healthier foods, and a business that I suspect is, if it's not already, is going to go great guns because this is so of the zeitgeist. Increasingly sugar-laden, unhealthy diets, he thinks, could be to blame for behavioural breakdown across schools. And then you've got the story about weight loss jabs for the jobless in a plan to put people back to work, which has been horribly misreported and misrepresented in some corners of the media. If you have, for reasons that are entirely not of your own making, ended up thinking that the government is suggesting they're going to inject fat people and then they'll quickly be able to get a job, then I'm afraid you've been quite hideously misinformed. It's a 5-year investigation into whether or not weight loss treatment will impact upon long-term health implications to a point where it improves work figures. So if you were to start a course now, then 5 years later, you would be less likely to have succumbed to diabetes or to be unable to work until you get a new hip or to have conditions, any condition linked to obesity that might prevent you from going to work, up to, and I presume, including stroke. Then if you are helped to lose a lot of weight over a 5-year period, then the likelihood of you not being able to work during or at the end of that period is massively reduced. So it's an investigation, and it may conclude it doesn't make the blindest bit of difference at all. But I think it's important that you understand things before you're invited to form an opinion on them. And what the weight loss jabs for the jobless plan does is the polar opposite of suggest that you line up a bunch of overweight people, give them an injection, and then pat them on the back and send them off to work, which they couldn't previously do. I don't know how you end up arriving at a conclusion like that from even the most cursory reading of the actual facts. But there are 2.8 million people out of work due to long-term sickness, and the challenge is to stop that number growing before it starts shrinking. But I think the story of all the stories involving food today that I'm going to go to next is this one about the junk food diets. I really like Tim Spector. My wife studied for a master's degree under him at the University College of London many, many moons ago. And it's when I first got turned on to nutrition and particularly ultra-processed foods, and crucially, the relationship between diet and mental health. And we're going back 15 years now. It all felt a bit woo, to be honest with you. And I used to, oh no, I've done it again. I used to be an idiot on this as well, didn't I? Did I? You'll remember better than I do. Obesity affects your memory as well, actually. That was another story about food in the news today. So, there you go. It's a good job I remembered that, isn't it? It's probably because I'm so svelte. So, I think that I used to poo-poo the claims that having a tub of Haribo had turned your kid hyperactive, didn't I? I always remember the story about the little girl who drank so much Sunny Delight she turned orange. And I thought, that can't be good. That's in my first book. That's in How to Be Right, that story. But the idea that, didn't I used to poo-poo that on the grounds that I'd given my children some sweets and they hadn't suddenly turned into axe murderers. Therefore, it couldn't possibly be true that sweets have an impact upon children's behaviour. How plausible does it feel to you today that eating rubbish affects A, your mental health, and B, your behaviour? How plausible does it feel to you that when you've eaten really healthily, you feel better than you do when you've eaten really unhealthily? I mean, just how plausible does it feel? Well, exactly. And I don't just mean the feeling of righteousness you get when you've overdosed on quinoa. I mean the fact that you don't feel sluggish and bloated and tired. You do when you've got a sort of carbohydrate crash. I had a carbohydrate crash on University Challenge once, but that's probably a story for another day. I think we generally accept that, don't we? The relationship between food. I mean, it's a bit like saying, do you think food has any impact on your health? I mean, who would possibly argue that what you eat has no impact at all on your health? If you just take the word health separately and don't say physical or mental, do you think your diet influences your health? Do you think your diet impacts your health? Imagine coming back to that question and saying no. No, I don't think what I eat has any impact whatsoever on my health. Okay, so you got someone over there who lives on Haribo. Other sweets are available, although not in some shops. So you've got someone over there who lives on Haribo and someone over there who lives on a 5-a-day, wonderful, fully nutritious diet. Give it a month. Who's going to be healthier? You see? Look, some people can live on, I don't know, ready brek and somehow manage to maintain magnificent physiques. But generally speaking, don't live on ready brek, lads. But generally speaking, no one would dispute the relationship between health and diet. So then when I stick the word mental in front of the word health, why would anybody change their mind? Why would anybody respond by saying, oh, no, I don't believe that? I wonder how many people knew that British children have been declared the unhealthiest in the world. I take you back to Matthew Parris's column in the Times today, because he wrote, if I have shares in Marlboro cigarettes, I must declare this before arguing against restrictions on tobacco, which puts some of his colleagues on the Times and the Sunday Times who work for lobby groups masquerading as think tanks that fail to declare the donations they receive from organisations like Big Tobacco or fossil fuels in what you'd imagine to be a fairly uncomfortable situation. But I'll leave that for the Times Christmas party. You know why British children are the unhealthiest in the world. It's largely because of the enormous amounts of effort that are put into opposing health measures on the grounds of, Eric Pickles again, small statism on the ground. The government shouldn't be getting involved in stuff like that. It's absolutely fine for multinational companies to spend billions of pounds encouraging us to feed all sorts of poisonous muck to our children. But as soon as someone suggests the government should step in and A, make it harder, or B, spend some money on encouraging people to eat more healthily, the Tufton Street vampires have a collective coronary, don't they, metaphorically speaking? So I don't fully understand why the relationship between diet and health is even debated. Mark points out someone's done that experiment I just described. Morgan Spurlock, many years ago, made a film called Super Size Me. An extraordinary film. I think elements of it may have been called into question since, but he essentially lived for a month on junk food, and the promise he made to himself and his viewers was that if he was offered a supersize, you remember you'd be in a burger bar and they'd say, do you want to supersize that? He had to always say yes. And of course, upselling, that's something I think I learned about from that film, is the idea of somebody trying to sell you more than you've gone in to buy because the profit margins increase exponentially. And his health, even the doctors that were looking after him couldn't believe the speed and the violence with which his health declined. If you've never heard of that film, sometimes when you get to my age, you presume that your cultural references are going to be familiar to everybody. But we discovered two things yesterday. We discovered how many young people were listening on a regular basis, and that one of them had never heard of the Fonz, or indeed the entire sitcom Happy Days. So I can make no presumptions about popular cultural references. If you don't know about Super Size Me, then it's worth looking into. Although, as I said, I can't remember the details, but I think there maybe some elements had been called into question since. But what can't be called into question is the speed and the violence of his physical decline. So the government has said it's going to restrict junk food advertising, at which point, I apologise for saying idiots, but sometimes it's the only word that fits. Idiots will start shouting about the nanny state or how you shouldn't be empowering councils to stop fast food outlets operating near schools. It's freedom of choice. I think he died, actually, and Morgan Spurlock, and turned out to have been suffering from alcoholism for much of his life. I knew it had got complicated, but listen, the point stands. You've got someone over there living on Haribo, someone on there living on Sprouts. Who's going to be healthier? So I think, because we don't know for sure whether, and Tim Spector's point is that children born during the pandemic who started school this year have a whole range of development issues. The numbers arriving in buggies or nappies, unable to communicate, sit still or behave, is profoundly troubling. The impact of lockdown on some so-called COVID babies, he says, has been compounded by unhealthy shifts in behaviour, with experts blaming diets filled with ultra-processed foods and sedentary playtimes, too much movies, games, tablets, phones, televisions. The Centre for Young Lives, which is a think tank focused on the well-being of children and young people, recently estimated that a third of children entering education in 2022-2023 were not school ready. 2 in 5 children can't respond to basic instructions. Half cannot sit still in class. So how do we map or measure the impact that diet has on health? I'm going to do this in quite a boring way. At least it's going to be boring from where I'm sitting. It's not going to be boring, hopefully, from where you're sitting. I'm not going to conjure up any castles in the sky or ask you any profound philosophical questions. I just want anybody who has been surprised by the scale of the impact that dietary change has had on their life to call me and tell the rest of us about it. And I'm particularly interested in behavioural issues and mental health. So it may be that you've done it for your children. It may be that you changed your child's diet. It's got to be pretty profound, hasn't it? It's got to be some fairly big changes, and you cannot believe the difference that it's made. And remember, I'm always wary of being too prescriptive, but I'm much more interested in behaviour and mental health. Not exclusively, because I think people who can diet their way out of diabetes are fascinating as well. But I want to examine the contention that junk food diets contribute to unruliness, to a generation of unruly children. And one way to do that would be to look at the impacts that it's had on other people and other generations. So you have made a serious life decision. You've made a serious change to your diet, and your experiences will help the rest of us come to a much better understanding of the difference it can make to your mood, to your behavior, and to your mental health. So it's either you or your children, but the point is you've done it, and you can tell the rest of us what has happened. I've said to you before, the 2 areas of scientific research that I think are going to be huge in the coming years, or 2 of the areas that are going to be huge, are the relationship between gut health and mental health, which Roddy's picked up on as already being quite astounding. And on a completely different note, I think that black mold or mold in homes is going to be found to have had huge impacts upon all manner of health issues in the years to come. But we're looking at the health and the diet first. A mood, mental health and behaviour. What differences did it make when you turned your diet upside down? And we can do it the other way as well. Because if you get depressed and your diet diminishes, your diet deteriorates, I'm fairly confident it makes everything worse. 0345 6060 973. My inbox is currently full of fart jokes because I raised the possibility of someone living entirely upon a diet of Sprouts. Honestly, you're so predictable.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Minutes after 11. It is, of course, Wednesday. It's normal PMQs today, is it? Everyone's back. So Keir Starmer versus flipping heck. Kemi Badenoch. Oh, that was close. I thought I had obesity-related memory loss there for a minute. It's been a couple of weeks. So Kemi Badenoch will be back in the opposition front seat today. But we're talking about the relationship between diet and health in response to claims, really, and I suppose beliefs. I don't know if the evidence is there yet, from a really impressive academic called Tim Spector, professor of epidemiology, that the reason why so many young children are behaving in such an abominable fashion is, in his view, largely linked to the diets that were inflicted upon them during lockdown, when, oddly, given that you would theoretically have had more time to prepare food and to shop, the traffic went in the opposite direction, and ultra-processed foods in particular, some of which is directly from chemicals, sugar spikes, sugar dips, having poor gut microbes, all of these factors contribute to create a situation in which children's mental health and therefore behaviour declines violently. And I thought, because we can't really do experiments on children, Ofcom gets really, really strict about that sort of thing. We've looked into it. You can't do experiments on children. So we'll look at what's happened to us when we've made profound changes to our diet, and mood, mental health and behaviour being particular areas of interest. Chris is in Exeter. Chris, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, yeah. Hi, James. Long-time listener, long-time fan.
Thank you.
Good to speak to you.
Likewise.
Yes, so... about 2018, 2019, I weighed about 19.5 stone.
Okay.
I put on weight drastically. So I used to work in the hospitality industry. I used to drink a few pints after most shifts.
Sure.
Relied on takeaway food as a staple diet and picking food whilst eating, whilst working.
Yes.
Got to COVID lockdown, and obviously with nothing to do, so I focused a lot about exercise, doing 10,000 steps a day, and I changed my diet. I started eating home-cooked foods.
What pushed you? What changed you?
Because I was scared that I was not going to see my family again
Really?
for much longer. You just, like, I couldn't even walk up a hill.
Yeah.
And I knew that my mental health was struggling.
In what way? Because I don't want to. Well, I do want to pry. Actually, it's the whole point of this phone in, and you've rung it, so I'm going to pry. I mean, we're talking. Would you anxiety, depression? How would you typify the mental health impact?
Very much anxiety and depression. Worn out, working long hours for a living.
We have to strip. We can't strip out the alcohol here, can we? Because if you were drinking a lot,
that was a part of it.
Sure.
That was a part of it. But what it did do is it helps me come off the alcohol and manage my alcohol intake a lot better.
Yes.
I now
health breeds health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm now weigh 14.5 stone. And I climbed Mount Snowdon last year, which never would have happened.
Does that count? So my wife climbed Mount Snowdon a couple of months ago, and I wasn't convinced that it actually counts as climbing.
Oh, it does.
Isn't it just a very steep walk?
There's a bit of a scramble.
Oh, I thought there was a train.
Oh, no. I didn't take that path. I took it on the way back, funny enough.
Oh, so there's different, but you can go up a climby path, and there's also a walkie path, and there's a railway as well. So
that's right, yes. Okay. But to do that was a massive achievement, and I now go to the gym 2 or 3 times a week. I swim. I just live a much more healthier lifestyle, and I think it is so crucial that I sometimes eat like a takeaway food or a snack as a treat. I generally just feel like stodgy and worse.
Just on one?
Yeah, sometimes if I have like a pizza, we share a pizza, I just feel like my stomach just feels awful for having it.
Depends what sort you have, doesn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, well, I'm not a fiery one anymore, but yeah.
No. But briefly, on the mental side of things, on the kind of, what are we talking about? Alertness? We're talking about, what is it that's changed?
Everything. Alertness. I'm able to change career, do a new job role that I never thought was possible. I feel much more awake. Silly things, just having like a good breakfast, a good lunch and a good dinner consistently with vegetables.
Sleeping better.
5 a day. Sleeping 10 times better. I get 8 hours sleep a night.
Do you know what you just said? It's extraordinary, isn't it? Because I mean, I don't think it lends itself to a phone-in because it's a 5-year study into quite complicated factors. But this new government trial, or the trial in Manchester, weight loss jabs for jobless in Labour drive to get people back to work. I just spent 5 minutes saying it's not as if people are going to suddenly lose weight and then go to work. And the first call on a completely different subject says, and because I suddenly lost quite a lot of weight, I was able to do a completely different job. I was actually. Yes. So it's possibly even more nuanced than I allowed. Chris, take care. Thank you for that. It's that notion of feeling better as opposed to just being better that interests me, because that's the bit that speaks directly to the idea that this may be why so many children are behaving so badly in school. I think that No Hostages has found one of my most assiduous and one of my favourite Blue Sky correspondents. If you don't follow me on Blue Sky, you can do at Mr. James O.B. He's pointed me at the research that may well have influenced my original position on this, because they tested the idea that sugar has a negative effect on children's behaviour. And what this one study actually discovered was that when parents were told that their kids had had sugar, the parents would rate their children as more hyperactive. So the expectations were shaping perceptions. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't true, that the children who had had sugar didn't behave more hyperactively. And I think many of us probably now recognise that. Lee's in Ruislip. Lee, what would you like to say?
How you doing, James? Hope you're well. I work with kids in schools, and we did a pilot study with a group of kids who were getting in a lot of trouble.
Oh, gosh, really? So right at the heart of this whole story, then?
Yeah, pretty much. It's quite frustrating, actually, because what we found out is it should be known like worldwide, and I think it is to a degree. Anyway, a lot of the kids weren't having any breakfast at all.
Yeah.
Some of them were coming in with, as you say, a packet of Haribo's, a Red Bull or a Monster drink, a packet of crisps.
Which they're not really supposed to be having anyway, are they, legally? Isn't there an age limit on energy drinks? But anyway, that's by the by.
There is now. They can still get their hands on them, and that hasn't been in place forever. But you still see it now, unfortunately. And it was, to me, it was definitely having a huge impact, because there were sugar spikes that were happening. They were coming in being hyperactive, then they weren't having any sugar, that would run out, and then they start to crash and get the hump and start to being sluggish. We changed that up. I actually pushed for this to happen in the particular school I was working in at the time.
Right.
And we got them all having shakes in the morning, which I bring in. I've spoken to you before about this, actually, and I told you the story about the shakes that I brought in.
It's a while ago, though.
This was a while back, this was a while ago. I remember it, James. You might not, but I...
Go on.
And it made a huge impact. They were coming in, they were definitely having a decent breakfast.
How did you... remind me how you identified the children that you were going to put on the scheme, on the programme?
Asking them what they had for breakfast, because they'd be in the second or first period in school, and they'd be like either, inattentive, they wouldn't be able to focus or concentrate.
And that means they can play up a bit, doesn't it? Or start distracting each other.
Well, so they think, but I don't have it, to be honest with you. But,
I believe that.
So we kept them all on point with that, and and then we made sure they were having shakes. We made sure that they weren't eating junk. Like we said, look, be part of this. Like, give it a go and see what happens. And the change was just so clear and apparent. The actual data was changing.
And what did they say? Did they report? I mean, because that's the real challenge, isn't it? Is the helping them understand why they feel better and why they're having a better experience at school.
Well, exactly, and this is it. And we're, some of the things we're educating kids about are not as urgent as this. To be honest with you, they need to know themselves and what it is. And this is what I tell them: what they're putting in their bodies is so important to how they're going to develop physically and mentally. I mean, I can't remember it now, but I saw it on something or other. The correlation between the rise in processed foods and illnesses in kids, it's so clear to see. It's embarrassing, and it makes you wonder why it's not more out there.
Well, it makes you wonder until you remember the prominence of Tufton Street ghouls and vampires across public discourse, and indeed in every single corner of the British media, except this radio show, where these characters will routinely pop up without revealing that their anti-nanny state rhetoric is often secretly funded by people who profit from poisoning our children in this way. Did you know that the 2022 study in Sao Paulo, Lee, made us bottom, the unhealthiest in the world, overtaking the United States with the most UPFs consumed than any other cohort of 2 to 5 year olds in the world?
Well, that's just terrifying, isn't it?
Yes, because it means people like you are like, freedom fighters up against the full might of the Soviet war machine.
You've got it. That's how it feels sometimes. That is how it feels.
You and me both. It's 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's there. 61% of 2 to 5 year olds' diets in Britain were made up of UPFs. 58% in the US. 2 to 3 times the amount consumed in South American countries where, guess what? South American countries, right? Say something snobbish and superior, something a little bit Anglo-centric or Western imperialist, like cultural imperialism. Yes, all South American countries. Guess what? Where food labelling rules are stricter. Oh, down with that sort of thing. It's freedom of choice. Up with the small state, down with where food labelling rules are stricter. So, spoiler alert, you know what you're putting in your mouth and you know what you're putting in your child. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Here's a little game for you. When was the last farmers' protest in London? Right? Can you do that? Do you want to have a go at that? It was last week, right? The last one. And I'm going to ask my colleagues to join in on this one as well, because we do this stuff for a living. When was the one before that? When do you think the one before that was? You're not allowed to Google it, Keith. There was one in March. The one in March was essentially pointing out the tragedy of Brexit for the UK farmers. And they were convoys of tractors. They were in Parliament Square. They drove in slow motion through South London, where supporters awaited. I don't know where Jeremy Clarkson was. Maybe that's why the cameras were not in attendance on anything like the scale that they were last week. Signs that read, "No farmers, no food, no futures." Protesters called on the government to end the trade deals that they say allow imports of food, the same trade deals that Vauxhall said would probably lead to the closure of factories. If you're just joining us today, Vauxhall have announced the closure of a factory. And this was the work of Save British Farming and another organisation. And I don't know why it got a fraction of the coverage. Maybe the numbers were much smaller, but I suppose in a sense you'd also wonder why the millions of people that signed a petition for a second referendum, which I said at the time was pointless and a waste of time, but I appreciate people want to articulate their feelings, got a considerably less coverage than the number of people signing a referendum calling for the first Prime Minister in the last 5 to get into Downing Street for the first time as a consequence of a general election, to call another general election. It can't be 5. I must have got that wrong. Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak. They all got into Downing Street the first time without a general election, didn't they? David Cameron won a general election, but who voted for a coalition in 2010? So where was the petition then? So we didn't vote for literally nobody. No single voter in the whole of the United Kingdom put an X in the box that said coalition. Because there wasn't one. So after Cameron, May, no general election when she got the job. After May, Johnson, no general election when he got the job. They both subsequently won general elections, but when you got the job, no general election. After May, Johnson, after Johnson, Truss. Easy to forget, if only. And no general election at all. And after Truss, Sunak, no general election. And when he did call one, he lost it. So 4 of the 5 last PMs have been handed the reins of power without any democratic process whatsoever. This nation of bedwetting Brexiters are now calling for the only MP, the only Prime Minister in the last 5 to have achieved prime ministerial office via a general election for the first time. He's the one that should apparently call another general election because they're very unhappy about something unspecified. Is that where the word snowflakes come from? Is that where the word snowflakes come from? What do they want to do? They want to cancel a general election, despite the fact that only 1 in 5 prime ministers in the last 8 years has actually achieved office for the first time as a consequence of a general election. You know, I wrote a book called How They Broke Britain, and I wondered whether it was going to have legs after Keir Starmer won the general election. And it's things like this that explain why it's still selling 1,000 copies a week, a year after it was published. Because it's all what do you do next? If you're looking at The Fisherman that we talked about at the top of the show, or you're looking at Vauxhall that has been rightly in our bulletins today, what on earth do you do next? You just have to start shouting. It's not our fault. It's nothing to do with us. We trusted Boris Johnson. We trusted Nigel Farage. We trusted Liz Truss. We trusted the Daily Mail. We trusted the Daily Telegraph. We trusted the Daily Express. We trusted Rupert Murdoch. We trusted we trusted right-wing blowhards on the radio telling me that Brexit was going to be brilliant. We trusted all these people. We're still not ready to admit that we made a terrible mistake and that we were mugged. So let's overthrow the government. What? I'm signing a petition to overthrow the government. Just run through the last 14 years, lads, will you? Please? The things that you thought were going to go great? Richard Littlejohn in the Daily Mail yesterday, actually writing in a national newspaper that told you Liz Truss was a genius, about how Keir Starmer should walk the plank. It is beyond surreal. On the plus side, it means that How They Broke Britain is likely to become an academic text in years to come. On the downside, they are still crudding all over my country, and they don't seem to be running out of energy. It's extraordinary. I suppose Donald Trump has given them a bit of a boost, has he? Given them a bit of a fillip. Well, what's that you say? Who's your second favourite rapist, if you're a Donald Trump fan? There's a question I'd like to see more people get asked when they pop up on television. Nadine Dorries writing in the Daily Mail yesterday about how great Donald Trump is, and then writing a very poignant little piece about how she was a victim of sexual abuse as a child, and apparently lacking the wit to see how those two stories might, for some people who've been victims of the kind of sexual assault that Donald Trump boasts about, and indeed has been found by a court to have committed, not seeing that might be triggering, perhaps, for other victims of sexual assault. So next time someone tells you they're a Donald Trump fan, ask them who their second favourite rapist is. It might give them a little bit of pause. I doubt it. But it might give them a little bit of... Who's your second favourite sex offender? Because I know your favourite is the one that was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein for 10 years. Don't take my word for it. That's according to Jeffrey Epstein. You remember him. He's the paedophile sex trafficker. Photographed with Donald Trump more times than Jeff Hurst got photographed with the World Cup. But who's your second favourite? Might be him, might be Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe you're a Jeffrey Epstein fan. You keep that quiet. It's extraordinary. And it's not... I mean, this is where it comes from. This is where the madness comes from. The idea that because for the first time in 14 years, having inflicted untold horrors upon this country, these people aren't in charge. They don't know how to process it. One thing I'd say, the idea that Keir Starmer and the Labour government aren't doing much, if they're not doing much, why are this lot so terrified? What are they so scared of? A slight shift of a slight redistribution of wealth? What are they so terrified? Anyway, who's your second favourite rapist? That might be a good question for the presenter of Question Time next time someone starts singing the praises of Donald Trump on the programme. Sorry, I don't know quite where that came from, but I do get cross when I see these stories about damage being done to parts of my country that I told you was going to happen. Well, not even me, the people who understood the fishing industry, the people who understood the car industry. Just got completely ignored. While David Frost got put in the House of Lords where he can sit next to Daniel Hannan. And what happens to the rest of the country? They are encouraged by the same forces to start signing petitions calling for the first Prime Minister in 5 to actually be elected to Downing Street for his first term of office, to somehow be denied the exercise of power. They're absolutely terrified that Labour's policies might work. Absolutely terrified. And of course, as ever, it's the people who might benefit from it who've been persuaded to lead the march against it. And that is the end of my TED Talk. So, back to nutrition, children, mental health, behaviour, and crucially, I think, mood. Aaron is in Barnet. If he's still awake, he's about to tell us why he picked up the phone.
Good morning, James.
Hello.
I'm afraid I am still awake.
Carry on.
At the age of 27, I was diagnosed with depression, having probably lived a fairly healthy lifestyle up to that point. The subsequent 20 years, I went on a bit of a junk food rampage. My depression was really suffering from apathy, self-care and caring for others. In those 20 years, after consuming, I would say, roughly 3 to 4 takeaways a week, lots of cans of Red Bull, I had a heart attack at 47.
47. So you went, in 20 years, you essentially hijacked your own health.
Quite simply, yes. Due to my mental state.
Yes, I understand.
And my first heart attack wasn't enough to jolt me out of it, so I then had a second heart attack 2 years later. Because I didn't take any action after the first one. And then I decided actually it was time to live. So I'm now 57. I've lost, 11 stones, and I haven't suffered from depression for 5 years.
It's a real chicken and egg with you, isn't it? Because the depression or the response to trauma prompted health collapse. Health collapse prompted depression. I know it would be very hard to separate the two. So how did you? And it needed the shock to the system of the second heart attack to make you realise that if you didn't get off this horse, you were dead.
Well, that's kind of exactly how the doctor put it. I was in the red zone for diabetes, blood pressure and cholesterol. Losing weight was the hardest part. And I actually know, I think the biggest battle is actually wanting to care for yourself.
Okay, yes.
I think that's the most fundamental battle, because I think I've been on every single diet possible. But really the problem was that I didn't care. Yeah. So I think and then retraining the brain how to eat properly, because I'd done it for 27 years previously.
Right.
Prior to my depression.
Gosh, so your life is in 3 acts at the moment, isn't it, really?
Yes, but probably in the best place it's been for a very, very long time. But I can certainly attest that food has a huge impact on mood and everything else.
How quickly do you start feeling better? I mean, this might be a stupid question, in which case you're more than welcome to tell me. But, I mean, if you make those changes, you're going to relapse. And some nights you just might really fancy a dirty pizza or something. But when you've made a meaningful change and it's sticking, how quickly do you start feeling mentally improved?
Within a year of attempting to lose weight, and I think within the first year I lost about 1.5 stone, maybe 2 stones, I started feeling so much better. And then once you start feeling better, you want to feel even better. And I think that becomes the drive. I mean, that's the kicker, is that you reward yourself for feeling better by doing the things that will make you feel even better. What I meant by chicken and egg, as I know you know, but in case there's any confusion, was how you separate the cause from the symptom, or the symptom from the cause. As if you have a terrible experience and you start comfort eating to get out of it, the comfort eating makes everything worse, except in that little moment of comforting the consequences of the terrible experience. So the depression and the diet become almost like a Scylla and Charybdis that are crushing you from either side, and you don't know which side to deal with first. But the thing you can deal with is what you put in your mouth. Aaron, thank you. What a great story, and well done. I hope it's appropriate for me to say that, because this stuff isn't easy, which is why it is the business of government, which is why people who talk about nanny states, often people who've still got nannies, despite being well into their 6th decade, in a pejorative way, I'd let Tony put it. Tony puts it best from Bishop Stortford. He says, James, sometimes you make me wonder whether everyone really has my best interests at heart. Yeah. Funny that.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:49 is the time. PMQ's on the way. Natasha Clark joining me shortly to look ahead as to what might come up there. It's quite hard to call at the moment, isn't it? But we will discover. Rishi Sunak didn't turn up. I don't know if he was paired. Perhaps Natasha will know. Didn't turn up to vote for the tobacco legislation, the smoking legislation that was supposed to be a big part of his legacy yesterday. And I note from the work of the inimitable Russell Scott that he's changed the nature of his business as well, or the family business that he runs with his wife, to, I think, make it rather harder to scrutinise what it is that they are actually up to. Let me make sure I get that right. Yeah, so the office of Akshata and Murthy and Rishi Sunak has moved from a limited company to an unlimited company, which means he no longer has to make his company accounts public. I think David Cameron did something similar a few years ago. I don't know whether I'm naive or not, but I do wonder whether former prime ministers should be permitted to do that. It seems a bit strange. And hey, if Tony Blair's done it as well, then let me know and I shall happily share that information as well. 10 to 12 is the time. Speaking of sharing information, the difference that diet has made to your mental health, mood, and if we could in some way measure children, then we'd include behaviour as well. Jason's in Malvern. Jason, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well. You sound surprised. Can we just clarify that I didn't ring you?
No, I just, first time
Welcome.
I've got through.
Welcome.
Yeah. So what it is, I went on diet twice because, firstly, I was like, put on a bit of weight and I can notice it. But at the time, I was finding it hard to concentrate on things.
Right.
I do university studying in my part-time, and was getting like brain fog, general just difficulty concentrating on things, maybe even some sort of depression maybe kicking in.
Yes.
And my typical diet was, although our general dinners weren't overly processed, but, you know, I love to go and get, I don't know, a sausage roll here and there every day, or a chocolate bar, or like sugar in my coffee at work, especially during COVID when they made the coffee machines free at work.
Right.
And
how did you know? How did you know that something fixable was happening, if you like, or that something that you could make a change?
The stomach ache part, I thought.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not. I thought, oh, maybe that can be fixed. You know. And so I'd done that basically. I thought, oh, let's go and eat better. You know. And so I did eat better. And what happened was, because it's just a bit of a guess, I done that. I ate better during the week. I didn't eat after a late shift as well. And I sort of treated myself on the weekend. I lost not a lot of weight, only about 5k.
Right.
But for about 2 months, I felt great.
And then what happened?
Mentally great for 2 months. And I was mentally great, physically great. And I slipped. And it happened again. I was getting these brain fogs, headache, things like that. And then you turned it around again.
You sound as if you're doing 3 things at once at the moment, Jason. So
yeah.
I won't.
No. I'm thinking to myself, and then I was had to just recall what happened.
Yes.
I done it again. I felt great again, and it slipped. And the first slip was because of Christmas.
Yeah, fair enough.
And then the second slip, I think, was my wife's birthday.
And and so even like relatively temporary blips, you can feel the impact that it's having. Things like brain fog are interesting, tummy aches, all of these things are going to be linked to ultra-processed foods. And yet the information is out there, but you have to find it for yourself at the moment, largely thanks to the efforts of Chris Van Tulliken and his book, Ultra-Processed Food, which I would recommend to you, actually. And I'm glad you're turning it around again. But you feel the slip, and it enforces the notion of a relationship between your diet and your equilibrium, would we call it? Your mental equilibrium. Take care, Jason. From Jason to Jane, from Malvern to Blackpool. Jane, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Lovely to speak to you.
Likewise.
Mine doesn't relate to children, but to people at the other end of life. So my father was diagnosed with dementia back in 2011, and we came to live with him to look after him in the last few years, and we noticed a distinct change in his dementia diagnosis from what he was eating. Gosh. From when we came to live with him. So his condition improved quite dramatically based on what he was eating, basically. So once we started cooking for him and he was having proper meals and eating really healthy, balanced meals.
What was he eating before? Because I mean, again, I can't keep saying chicken and egg in a conversation about food and diet, can I? But again, his dementia probably made him make poorer choices when it came to his diet.
Yeah. So things that he would choose to buy from the shops would be anything really that he could pick up with his hand and put in his mouth. So It would be things like pies,
yes,
or cakes, or that kind of things. Egg custards was a favourite. Chocolate eclairs, anything that was
tart,
pork pies. Yeah. So we came here, and both my husband and I are both keen cooks. So we changed the way he ate.
Gosh,
quite drastically.
Lovely. And saw it, in a week, in a month?
Oh, immediately. It was immediate. So
he still had dementia, just to be clear. No one's discovered a cure for dementia, but his general demeanour and alertness improved.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we both think exactly the same, that it was the diet that was the big difference. And it does make me consider, what people eat
in sort of people who were elderly, who were living either on their own, who have carers going in and making basic food, or people who are bought ready meals, who are just getting things out of the freezer and warming them up.
Because it is easier. They're called convenience foods for a reason, aren't they? They're called...
Well, yeah, absolutely.
I hadn't thought of that. And what would be... So even in a care home, you'd want to take as much interest in the diet in a care home that you would in a primary school.
Absolutely, yeah. I had a similar experience with my mum going into a respite for a week, and the food that she was given was absolutely horrific.
Yeah, and that is going to have an impact. God, the more you dig into this, the more mad it is that we've allowed ourselves to be conditioned isn't quite the right word, but to be pushed into these positions where we're making bad situations worse and then creating bad situations anew with stuff that's quite easily controlled, you would have thought. And listen, I know that I get a bit boring sometimes, but you have to look first at the effort that is put into persuading people to do the bad stuff. You know, even the attacks on Jamie Oliver when he was trying to improve school dinners, or the claims that a nanny state is a bad thing, or that the government should keep its beak out of these kind of issues, or that sugar taxes or better food labelling. Well, what would you do if you were making a ton of money out of poisoning the population? What would you do if someone said, would you like to sign some secret checks for think tanks that will be popping up on television and radio every day, arguing against all the things that might reduce your profits? What would you do? Would you take that? Would you take that offer? Yeah, it is 11:57. I don't think I've got time for Miranda in Birmingham because Natasha Clark is here. Can you make your case, Miranda, in 43 seconds?
Hi, James. Yes, I can.
Marvellous.
I just wanted to combine the two things that you've been speaking about, which is diet and the weight loss jab. So I've tried everything in my life, and quite frankly, I just love my food. And in March last year, my husband was diagnosed with something quite nasty in his lungs, and he needs to have a double lung transplant. And
Holy moly. Okay.
I know. And I thought, I have got to look after him, like care for him full time.
Yes.
So, and there was no way that I could do it carrying 20 stone. So I went private and I got the weight loss jab in May of this year, and I've lost 90 pounds, 90.
Wow.
Now, which is amazing, but it's not, it's a tool. So I still had to stop eating rubbish, and I was eating, pasta bakes from Sainsbury's and, just like literally fast food, but food bought in the supermarket. As soon as I stopped eating that stuff, the weight dropped off. It absolutely dropped off.
And do you still would you still describe yourself as someone who loves their food?
Yeah.
But you're just loving different food?
No, if I want to have a bar of chocolate or a pasta for dinner, I have it. Right. But I just don't do it all the time.
Every day, all the time. So, all things in moderation. And this impacts directly upon your ability to care for your partner.
Exactly. So now I can actually, do things that physically I would never have been able to do before because I'd be sitting down out of breath. And I mean, he's the one with the rubbish lungs, and I'm sitting there going, I still just need a minute to just get myself together, Yes. So sometimes, and he's super, he's ex-military.
Right.
He's fit, and he's young. He's 47, and they've just found this nasty stuff, and he's never smoked, and they've found this nasty stuff.
So
and I just thought, I have, we often joke that between the two of us, we'd make up the perfect human, because I'm an opera singer, so my lungs are really, really good nick, but the shell that they're in
was not. Well, I'm not going to make the obvious joke, Miranda, about opera singing and so. Well, I've kind of just nodded towards it, haven't I?
It's all about it's all about the stereotype, and
Isn't it? Well, hey, good luck with this. I mean, it sounds amazing, but how powerful, poignant, really, that your partner's condition prompts you to make health changes and equips you to do things that you wouldn't have been able to do before, which is kind of the point of the experiment or the inquiry that's been conducted into the relationship between work and weight. Natasha Clark is here. It will be the A team today, so to speak, the number ones, the leaders.
You calling Kemi Badenoch part of your A-team?
No, I'm just calling her part of the Conservatives A-team, which is a very different thing.
Yes, we're back with we're back in business with Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer today after a brief hiatus last week where Keir was flying back from the G20. And we had Alex Burkhart standing in and Angela Rayner. So yes, it will be not quite as scrappy. I imagine
if you'd come in and asked me with the name of the bloke who did it last week.
I thought about giving you your own personal test. I should have done. He was actually standing up a few minutes ago.
I wouldn't have remembered.
So you would not have remembered who he was.
No, but that's a reflection on me being.
What was I said about his hair? Floppy.
Yeah, well, that's not quite what you said. But
floppy hair.
We'll move over. We'll pass on from that quickly. What do you think? And of course, as soon as the Leader of the Opposition gets to her feet, then we will cross live to the House of Commons. But what do you think she might do today?
I came up with a big list today, actually. I thought there was quite a lot that Kemi Badenoch could go on. I think if you heard her speech earlier to the CBI, she was quite punchy around what the government are doing around businesses. And as a former business secretary, I think she'd be quite keen, to press them on what they're doing or not doing on national insurance. However, Keir Starmer has a really good argument after she essentially said, well, I can't promise I'll reverse any of those national insurance changes. So
and Rachel Reeves this week have kind of forged their own handcuffs on a couple of pledges.
They have, and Rachel Reeves saying, I'm not going to raise any more taxes, a promise she cannot make for 5 years of a parliament.
I agree.
And I think, she really has tied herself in knots a little bit about that.
I suppose she'd have got lynched if she'd said that she refused to answer the question.
But we all know that that's the truth, don't we?
She gets lynched if she answers the question.
Well, you just say...
But you get lynched later.
You just say, I can't answer that. I'm not. You said the politician's answer is, I'm not going to write 5 years worth of budgets in this interview or in this speech, and she can't do that. Pharma's another one that could come up. Keir Starmer had a secret meeting with the NFU chief yesterday, which after Downing Street and Number 10 have repeatedly said Keir Starmer's got no plans to meet with the farmers' leaders. That was a really interesting development and has made a few of us raise eyebrows to think maybe a compromise sort of climb down solution could be on the cards from the government to try and soften some of the impact. Number 10 said they were in sort of listening to the strength of concern, I think was the comment that came out of Downing Street. But the fact that Keir Starmer is having such a prominent meeting, didn't brief us about it in advance of that, could be a sign that change is on the way. And obviously the Tories have been really pushing the government quite hard on this one. The other thing that could come up, Israel and the ICC, a problem for the government, problem for Keir Starmer. He obviously completely backs the use of the International Criminal Court and is very much Mr. Rules on this. But the
Mr. Rules.
Mr. Rules,
I like that.
That's
yes, I like that.
Yeah, it's probably not my phrase. A few others have used it before. But will he promise to respect the decision of the ICC should Benjamin Netanyahu set foot on?
I thought he had. You mean she might push him on the hypothetical of what happens if he gets redirected to Heathrow on his way to kiss Donald Trump's ring?
Well, exactly. And Benjamin Netanyahu has been to the UK. Yes. He's been to visit,
but not
US.
Since the arrest warrant was issued.
Not since that. No, but France have come out today and said, well, actually, because Israel aren't a signatory of the ICC, they wouldn't apply that. Will he be facing the same pressure to make those same comments as well? Downing Street have sort of left the door open on what they might do and sort of left it quite vague and wishy-washy on that. The floods is also something that I think Keir Starmer could get pushed on today, especially by some backbencher MPs in some of these more rural constituencies. We haven't seen Keir Starmer out with his wellies wading through the floodwater yet, but as we're getting much more rain today, weather situation's still not looking fantastic. MPs have been quite critical of the Met Office. Some privately are a bit critical that Keir Starmer hasn't been quite out and about on the front foot. He's been making an AI-related visit today. I think a lot of people will say, well, we really would love to see you out in the country talking to people who've been really, really affected by the fact that our flood defence system in the UK just isn't up to scratch.
Indeed. Just to clarify that, for me, not for you, the ministry in France on Wednesday today claimed that Netanyahu is covered by immunity as a sitting head of government because Israel is not a state member of the ICC. This follows an earlier insistence that they were fully committed to the International Criminal Court and the issuing of that warrant for his arrest on the charge of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity against Palestinians in Gaza since October 2023. Once again, I remind you, as soon as Kemi Badenoch gets to her feet, we will cross live to the House of Commons. Staying in the Middle East briefly, I haven't touched yet today on the return of some people to parts of Lebanon after that ceasefire was agreed between Israel and Hezbollah. We may have a little look at what's going on there tomorrow, but for now, it will be back to Parliament. We return shortly. That's three things. I'd say, if I were to rank them, I think you've probably done them. I'd probably done them in the right order. National Insurance, Farmers, ICC. Any curveballs?
Curveballs on my list. I mean, look, if I were any other minister but Kemi Badenoch, we might want to talk about electric car sales and Vauxhall closing that plant down. But she was the business secretary that introduced some of these quite punitive EV targets. So actually, I'm not sure that's going to work.
Let's find out. I think she'll mention Vauxhall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the CBI conference on Monday, the Chancellor said, and I quote, "I'm clear. I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes. I know that telling the truth to this House is important to the Prime Minister. So will he repeat his Chancellor's pledge now?"
Mr. Speaker, we set out our position at the budget that was just set out. We're fixing the foundations. We're dealing with the 22 billion black hole that they left. I'm not going to write the next 5 years of budgets here at this dispatch box. But, Mr. Speaker, we said we wouldn't hit the pay slips of working people. We passed the budget, we invest in the future, and we kept that promise.
Mr. Speaker, he's not fixing any foundations. He's making everything worse. The whole House would have heard him refuse to repeat the Chancellor's pledge, a pledge as worthless as the manifesto promises that he's talking about. If he is fixing foundations, why is it that the PMI index shows that business confidence has crashed since the budget?
Mr. Speaker, we're fixing the foundation. We've got record investment into this country. But she talks about tax rises. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, she stood there and said that she wanted all the investment, all the benefits of the budget, but she didn't know how she was going to pay for it. I noticed that, having come here criticising the national insurance rises over and over again, on Monday she admitted that she wouldn't reverse the position that we set out. Meanwhile, her science minister was saying he was going energetically to do the opposite. They really haven't got a clue what they're doing.
Mr. Speaker, if he wants to know what Conservatives would do, he should resign and find out. Until then...
I'll decide when there's more.
Mr. Speaker, until then, I'm the one asking the questions. There's a petition out there, 2 million people asking him to go. He's the one who doesn't know. He's the one who doesn't know how things work. It is not government that creates growth, Mr. Speaker. It is business. His employment secretary, I don't see her here, she wants more young people in work. But businesses say they are cutting jobs because of the Chancellor's budget. His Deputy Prime Minister, she is not here. Her employment rights bill will stop businesses hiring. That's what they say. The CBI said on Monday that the dots of the government's policy don't join up. They're right, aren't they?
Mr. Speaker, on Monday she said that she wouldn't reverse the increase in national insurance. Yesterday, on their legacy legislation, their predecessor, they couldn't decide what their position was. Today, they've launched a policy commission asking other people to give them some ideas for government. And she talks about a petition. We had a massive petition on the 4th of July in this country. We spent years taking our party from a party of protest to a party of government. They're hurtling in the opposite direction.
What a load of nonsense, Mr. Speaker. We had a budget in March this year and tractors were not blockading the streets of Whitehall afterwards. So let me give him another example of a real business. Following his budget, the head of McVitie's has said that it has been harder to understand what the case for investment in the UK is. So while the Prime Minister has been hobnobbing in Brazil, businesses have been struggling to digest his budget. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that the Employment Rights Bill shows that it is not only the ginger nut that is causing him problems?
Hey, Minister. I was attending the G20. I suspect on their current trajectory, they don't know whether they'd attend the G20 or not. Maybe the Policy Commission will come up with an answer on that one. But we've had record investment from overseas into this country. And she keeps carping from the sidelines. She says at this dispatch box, she wants all the benefits of the budget, all the investment, but she doesn't want to pay for any of it. Mr. Speaker, she's racked up £6.7 billion of unfunded commitments in just 3 weeks as leader of the opposition. So once it comes to the economy, we're the ones growing the economy.
Mr. Speaker, the investment he's taking credit for was our work. I was business secretary. We negotiated those deals that he announced. But the bottom line is that in all that he has said, he doesn't seem to care about the young people who will lose their jobs as a result of his budget. Perhaps he can show more concern for the 1,100 people who found out yesterday that they could lose their jobs at Vauxhall's plant in Luton. So while he flies around making unilateral commitments, back home, the real-world effects are businesses closing in Bedfordshire and Basildon. Does the Prime Minister stand by his promise to ban the sale of petrol cars by 2030, even if more jobs will be lost?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't normally invite a heckle, but that one was accurate. Mr. Speaker, the question of the position of jobs in Luton is a very serious one, and families and workers will be very worried, and we are obviously engaging with them. I would remind the Leader of the Opposition that the EV mandates that are an issue in this particular case were actually introduced by the last government. I would also remind her that she was the business secretary that introduced them. We're getting on with supporting those communities. She's shouting from the sideline.
Can they ban or not? Mr. Speaker, he clearly didn't read his briefing about the EV mandate. The fact is, we changed the date and made it easier for people. Everything he has done is attack people. The budget was an attack on farmers, an attack on workers, an attack on pensioners, an attack on the young, and an attack on thousands of charities and businesses across the country. The whole system is broken, Mr. Speaker, and he is making things worse. He is making things worse.
To be affected. Carry on.
Mr. Speaker, he is making things worse. Everyone is unhappy. Isn't it a good thing that the Chancellor is an expert at customer complaints?
Mr. Speaker, I think she's just read out the charge sheet against the last government. Everything is broken. And they come here every week with absolutely nothing to offer except complaints. Nothing constructive, no new ideas. They don't know what they're doing from one day to the next. Living in this fantasy world that everything was fine apparently for 14 years. Well, the country's fed up with those fantasies. They've got rid of those fantasies. We're going to take the hard decisions. They're jumping on every bandwagon that's passing. We're taking the country forward.
Imran Hussain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we enter the last week of Islamophobia Awareness Month, the Prime Minister will know that this year has been an extraordinarily difficult for British Muslims on the receiving end of society's most deplorable attitudes, considered easy prey for the far right and scapegoated by politicians endorsing institutional Islamophobia. And the reality is this emboldening and normalisation of Islamophobia, as highlighted in a number of reports, led to the race riots we saw on the streets of Britain this summer, where mosques and those who are visibly Muslim were subject to despicable attacks, with many left fearing for their lives. So will the Prime Minister condemn those in public office and positions of power who actively promote Islamophobia? Will he commit to adopting a definition today? And will he further outline what concrete steps the government is taking to rip out Islamophobia at its roots, including in this place?
Mr. Speaker, he's right to raise Islamophobia, and there's been a concerning rise in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism over recent months, and we are committed to tackling all forms of hatred, and we will work with others on an ongoing basis to make sure that we do. Thank you.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Red Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about the terrible impact of Storm Bert with all the flooding? Our thoughts are with all those affected, with thanks to our amazing emergency services. Mr. Speaker, Christine's father was told that he needed end-of-life care, but after a few days it was removed due to funding cuts. He was told that he wouldn't get it, and he died a few weeks later in excruciating pain. Christian said it was terrible to watch him suffer. Does the Prime Minister agree that whatever the House decides on Friday, it is urgent that we improve access to high-quality end-of-life care? And will he make that a key focus of the 10-year NHS plan? And will he commit now to protect hospices from the national insurance rise?
I thank you for raising that case, and I think the thoughts of the whole House with the family involved. And Mr. Speaker, obviously there's a very important vote on Friday, but whichever way that vote goes, we must invest properly in care across our health service, and that's why, in addition to putting the NHS back on its feet, we're putting forward a 10-year plan to make sure the NHS can give the care that everybody would expect across the spectrum, including end-of-life care.
So, Ed David.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for that reply, and I hope we'll hear more from ministers, particularly on hospices and national insurance, in days to come. Turning to the cost of living crisis, on Friday, Ofgem said that in January, energy bills would go up again after last month's 10% rise. Millions of people are really worried about how they're going to make ends meet this winter, not least hundreds of thousands of pensioners who are in poverty but above the pension credit limit, who will now lose winter fuel payments. So with energy bills going up again, will the Prime Minister reconsider and restore winter fuel payments?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously the whole House is concerned about energy bills, which are actually lower this year than they were last year. The long-term way to deal with this is clean power by 2030, to make sure we drive those energy bills down on a permanent basis. And that's what we will do. On the winter fuel allowance, he knows very well what the government's position is, and I've rehearsed it, indeed, with him many times.
Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Antisocial behaviour.
18 minutes after 12. Have you got any biscuit puns, Natasha Clark?
That has a huge
I'm too busy hobnobbing on the world stage.
She
that was
did
rubbish.
that one.
I know. I can't just nick someone else's.
Do you know
what
what
I just did?
You know
I
what
just
you
nicked
should
someone
have
else's
said
joke. What?
You should have. Oh, crumbs.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 12. Natasha Clark, that was absolutely extraordinary. Your finest ever performance at PMQs.
I could have written that Prime Minister's questions, couldn't I?
Indeed you could. Can we say the same? Can we deploy similar superlatives regarding the conduct of either Keir Starmer or Kemi Badenoch?
I'm going to disagree with you on whether the Kemi Badenoch. I'm sure you're going to tell me that she did terribly.
I think that's the best she's been, and she was appalling.
Well, she was the best she's been, but it is only her third time doing it. So does that really say anything?
You go first.
No, I think it was her best yet, and I think, we discussed this off air, that she was a lot calmer at the start of Prime Minister's questions. To start with, and that clearly, I think, worked for her. And as she went on, and as sort of it started to unravel, she sort of lost the room a little bit more. But that's partly the atmosphere of Prime Minister's questions, of being in the House of Commons surrounded by all your colleagues cheering you on.
And we mentioned something else which it probably merits repetition, which I'd overlooked, which is the actual volume. So the size of the Labour majority is such that the wall of noise that she's presented with. We were often quite critical of when the Tories did this, because it would involve people like Jonathan Gullis scratching his armpits while bellowing into the ether. But even people who behave in a civilised fashion can make a lot of noise in the House of Commons, and she's up against that. I think we probably haven't recalibrated what that would feel like from her position. So in terms of why she can start calm and then as the adrenaline starts to pump, become a little bit frenzied, a little bit frantic, appearing a little bit out of control. If you're confronted with that level of noise, I think your fight or flight syndrome probably kicks in a bit.
Yeah, it's easy to get swept up in the nature of Prime Minister's questions, and what it looks like on TV is very different to how it feels in that chamber, which is actually quite a lot smaller than you'd think. These wood-panelled walls really do reverberate all of the MPs sort of jeering and chanting in the back of that. But yeah, I thought Kemi Badenoch's, even if her style has a little bit to be desired, and she's still settling into obviously what is an incredibly difficult job being leader of the opposition, I thought she obviously went on good topics. Well, I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I
you
told
predicted
her
them all.
that she should.
Indeed, we'll do a quick run through of text. We begin with that from Chris. Natasha getting it bang on with Keir's response, actually. So not only did you get the questions right, you also got the answers right in the first
I spend
instance.
too much time with politicians when you can easily predict the answers that they're going to say.
You might have peaked. Dave writes, she's so poor it's not even funny anymore. We're on Kemi Badenoch now, I think, not Natasha Clark. Actually, yes, it is. Everything is broken because your lot broke everything. That would be directed at the Tories. James, Keir's bang on the money. The Tories have nothing constructive to contribute to this process. David writes, you've got to give it to her. Badenoch is on fire. How many years until they stop blaming one another for everything, asks Joe. I like that argument, Joe, but you've got to listen to the detail. It's not like they're pulling out Liam Byrne's note from 2010. You're actually looking at, particularly in the context of Vauxhall, you're looking at policies the Tories introduced. Alex makes an interesting point. I really want to like Starmer, as I voted for him, but he's at risk of appearing to never actually answer the questions in PMQs.
Totally agree with him there.
He sounds permanently outraged and usually defaults to his standard responses regarding £22 billion, etc. He needs to engage more with the questions. Chris says Kemi can't seem to land anything at all. Quite hilarious. Please put us out of our misery, says Charlie. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. I blame you. Blah, blah, blah. I blame you. A shambles, and Badenoch is so wooden it's embarrassing, and on it goes. Cameron quite liked the McVitie's puns, although most of them went over my head. I noticed I don't know where the ginger nut came from.
Was that in there? Did I miss that?
I didn't. But hobnobbing was a
hobnobbing made me chuckle. But yeah, look, going back to that texter's point, it is sort of not really always her job to needle them to sort of get a blow in, right? And actually, it's sometimes just about holding their feet to the fire, holding them to account. And I think on these topics, which are things that I think people are interested in, people do care about. So yeah, regardless of whether you like her style or not, farmers, taxes, businesses, jobs, those are the topics that I think she needs to be going on week in, week out, because they're things that actually matter to people. Going in on Donald Trump on your first outing was totally showing us totally out of touch with what actually British people think, and she needs to do that. And obviously the problem is that Keir Starmer will, no matter what she says, say, well, you don't have a policy on this yet. You actually don't know what you're going to do differently.
And then to say, if you want to find out what our policy is, you need to resign and let us take over.
Well, I'm not sure the country's ready for that.
And also referencing this comical petition was
no
probably...
politician
Would there be not someone in her circle saying, whatever you do, don't mention this nonsense online?
I would have never... Actually, it's a terrible idea for politicians to lean into this idea that launching a petition to overturn a general election is a good thing to be making a joke about at PMQs.
First Prime Minister in 5 to have actually been put in Downing Street in the first place by a general election, as opposed to the previous 4 Tories, which is...
It's mad. I wouldn't have done that.
Stop laughing and start weeping at the sadness and stupidity of it all. And so no ICC. You were wrong about that.
Yeah, and that's a difficult one, I think, to tell you. Maybe a little bit too complicated. And
not very party political either, really.
No, definitely not. But yeah, assisted dying as well was something that could have come up and did come up from Ed Davey. That was interesting. Obviously, we know Keir Starmer's previous suggestions on assisted dying is that he did support it. He said it's going to be a really important vote and that he wants to invest in palliative care no matter what happens at the end of that vote. So it'll be really interesting. All eyes will be on whether he will come up on Friday to listen to those debates. But the indication is that he probably won't, which makes me think he's probably already made up his mind. He probably was already quite likely to support it like he did last time.
Yes. Is this detached from the government? As a free vote? I've seen some criticism of Starmer for not having the courage of his own convictions on this, but the defence would be other people have got just as powerful convictions and they should be free to exercise them as well. Do you think as the vote on Friday approaches, it is detached from party politics, this bill?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody I'm speaking to is quite... There's quite a lot of people are still undecided.
Yes, I know.
And I was speaking to a sort of government minister yesterday who said, actually, I'm going to sit in the chamber and I'm going to listen to both sides and I'll make up my mind then and there.
It'll never catch on.
Exactly. Well, it doesn't usually happen. But actually, I think that does show the strength of feeling on both sides and how torn a lot of MPs are feeling. And they are being absolutely lobbied from both sides. Both the yes and no camp have really been ramping up this week. You mentioned Keir Starmer not coming out and sort of having those strong feelings that he clearly does.
Not allying the government to either side.
No, and that's because, the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, has ordered all Cabinet Ministers to not talk about their positions in public. Some of them, of course, have ignored those. We're streeting Shabana Mahmood, two very prominent voices on the No campaign.
For very different reasons.
For very, very different reasons. But actually, there's not quite been the same voices on the Yes campaign as there has been on the No. But look, I think it's hard to predict how it's going to go. Still think the vote's going to be very tight. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how that goes. Something else I also wanted to talk about is how Keir Starmer wouldn't commit to changing the 2030 car phase-out ban. And he sort of just batted away the question at Kemi Badenoch just then when he Did
they inherit this?
So the 2030 car ban was something that was pushed back to 2035 by Rishi Sunak around, I think, a year ago or so. Kemi Badenoch, the Labour Party came in and said, no, we're going to stick to that 2030. They've not actually done anything to change that yet. But with these EV targets, which many people feel are going too quickly, many car manufacturers do. Some say, actually, no, it's just the car manufacturers, actually, the people that haven't been early adopters to this, they've not been fast enough to take that up. They're the ones complaining. But businesses have got and the business secretary will have a really big case to answer here about whether they are going to do that. Thought it was really interesting that Keir Starmer's not committing whether he is going to stick to that 2030 ban. That's what some people in the Cabinet want to see. Other people want them to look again at those targets and whether they are too strict. So another round going on in government, going green, being
a lot
pro-business.
of politics, actually, unlike last time, as you mentioned, with references to Donald Trump and stuff. And this it gave Starmer a bit of an opening, the mention of this petition, because he comes straight back and says, we had a massive petition on the 4th of July in this country. And crucially, I missed this, because we chatter a bit while it's going on. We spent years taking our party from a party of protest to a party of government. They're hurtling in the opposite direction. There's some truth in that.
Yeah, and that's always Keir Starmer's argument when he's talking about these kind of things, and when people say to him, the Labour Party's changed, and he'll go, yes, I've changed it for the better, and I spent a lot of time ripping it out of the clutches of the hard left and putting it in, the centre ground once again, which obviously he's going to say, look, I've won an election and I've got a huge mandate. Well, it depends on what your definition of huge is, but he has got a mandate from the British public, and to lean into the idea of this mad petition, I think is a bit much.
And speaking of people not paying attention because they were chattering in the studio,
what else have we missed?
Well, the ginger nut reference was a jibe at Angela Rayner, who has red hair.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I used to get called ginger nut at school.
Did you?
Yeah. Sort of gingery.
That's where I'd expect that kind of comment to be confined
playground.
to in a school playground.
I still really like a ginger nut,
Kemi Badenoch is nothing if not novel. I don't imagine anyone would. Well, we'll see, won't we? Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:33. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention now, as we often do on Wednesdays, to a selection of stories, in fact, that I thought might interest you. Whenever someone fascinating comes into the studio for the first time, when they leave, I like to shake them by the hand and say, do keep in touch and let us know if you get up to anything else that's interesting. And Matt Shea has done precisely that. You've got 2 documentaries out at the moment.
That's right.
What a busy man. No wonder there's so many unemployed journalists out there. Should we start with the first, which is a Channel 4 Dispatches, looking at something that is of enduring fascination to my callers. This went out on Monday night, but for anybody who missed it, it's not an answer to all of the questions that people have about shoplifting, but it's an extraordinary journey into one particular mode of that crime that took you all the way to Bucharest.
Yeah, that's right. So shoplifting is at the highest level since records began. Around 900 incidents every hour is what the estimates are, costing retailers about £1.8 billion a year, adding around £133 a year to our household bills. And increasingly, one of the groups doing this kind of shoplifting are these organized shoplifting gangs who do it in a more systematic way. So as part of our investigation, we followed one particular group who stole over £100,000 worth of stuff from over 30 branches of Morrison's all across the country. And the things they're stealing aren't what you'd think. It's kind of bizarre, right? They're stealing like 1,000 packets of toothpaste, sunscreen, Sudocrem, Strepsils.
Very deliberately, though.
Yeah, very deliberately.
So that they can build a stockpile.
Exactly. And no one, not the police nor the retailers, were able to figure out what on earth was going on. Like, where is this stuff going? Where do you sell, 10,000.
Never mind the police and the retailers, mate. We've done phone-ins on it. On where does this stuff go? Because there's clearly the scale of the problem is such now that it can't just be drug addicts stealing cheese to sell in the pub or stealing smoked salmon to offer to or to order, or indeed the stories we heard on the programme about a kind of a black market stall where someone might, be selling you stuff out of a suitcase. The sense that there was something industrial going on was irresistible, and yet until you came along, it hadn't been proved.
Yeah, I mean, it is really mind-boggling to think of these kind of stash houses around the country with just mini Morrisons inside of them. But yeah, what we did was we tracked the ringleader of this Morrison's shoplifting spree back to Bucharest, and I confronted him outside his house. And you know how doorsteps usually work. You just get the door slammed in your face and they tell you to get out of there. For some reason, he actually sat down for an interview, and I said, where are all these goods going? And he said, well, to a wholesaler based in Bedford. And I was like, seriously, you've actually just told me? He said, yeah. I mean, everyone knows that, right? And so then I tracked down a wholesaler that matched his description, sent in an undercover reporter to basically pose as someone who had goods for sale. And this person revealed that they sell stolen goods essentially all around the world, hidden in other forms of shipments. So essentially a huge global distribution network.
And we're looking at Strepsils, toothpaste, Sudocrem and Lemsip.
Yeah.
Among other things. Because if your costs are incredibly low, then the margin actually becomes attractive. If you don't have to pay for production or manufacturing or packaging, and you're buying it from someone who's looking at £1 a unit or something like that, and you're selling it for 3 or 4, it actually becomes as attractive as more obvious crimes.
Exactly. And also you have to keep in mind the sheer quantity of stuff being stolen. I mean, they can drive across the whole country, and in a month they can hit over 200 shops and steal hundreds of grand's worth of stock.
The police, I mean, powerless to stop the lower level of shoplifting, we're frequently told, not least because the limit on the £200 limit, I think, on cases that they actively pursue. How close are they to getting a handle on this kind of thing?
The police have launched a central investigative unit to deal with the organised nature of this, and it is currently in action, and it remains to be seen how successful it will be in dismantling these groups. But they have certainly dismantled a few and are following a few.
What happens to, I've never done undercover journalism. I've been on the wrong end of a doorstep, actually, but that's a story. Yeah, that's a story for another day. What happens when you give this information, to the police? Do they act on it specifically? Do they go after the wholesaler that you have identified? Do they go after the gang leader that you've tracked down to Bucharest? Can they?
Well, in terms of shoplifting, it doesn't yet reach it doesn't score highly on the matrix for them to unlock the financial resources and the senior level detectives to go after this in an organized way. Certainly not to extradite someone from Romania. But I think the way to tackle these kind of transnational forms of crime is through transnational police cooperation of the exact kind that is becoming more difficult in the post-Brexit world.
And the impact on people is, as you've calculated, adding £133 to the average household's annual shopping bill. So you're just almost waiting for the traction, aren't you? My Morrison's, you probably don't know this, My Morrison's has put all the booze behind locked glass doors, which is quite a shock, really, in the context of a big supermarket. You have to press a button, not the wine, but you have to press a button if you want to buy a bottle of Baileys, and then a member of staff will come over. But no one is thinking of protecting the Strepsils.
Yeah, well, I've seen chocolate bars under lock and key.
Yeah.
But one thing that I also discovered when I was looking for leads in this story, I went to car boot sales all across the country. I went to so many car boot sales, and not the kind that you would go to find some cool vintage clothing or antiques, kinds where people were going to do their weekly shop because they needed a discounted price. And I have to say the poverty that I saw was shocking. In fact, even the Romanian undercover journalists who came with me on these outgoings, they've worked covering the criminal underworld in one of the poorest countries in Europe, and they said they've never seen poverty like they had at these car boot sales in Glasgow and London.
That's fascinating because when we've tried to discuss these things on the program, that's quite quickly raised as a possibility, as in people have little choice but to buy the stolen goods because they literally can't afford to buy the full price goods. Quickly the response will come in as, well, that's no excuse, but it might not be an excuse, it is an explanation.
Absolutely. And I think too often we think people are quick to dissuade the point that it is people stealing from shops to feed themselves because of the cost of living crisis. These organized gangs are not stealing to feed themselves, but the reason there's a market for cheaper goods is certainly because of the cost of living crisis to a degree.
And do we know how we compare to other countries? Have we got a problem that other countries haven't got?
The UK and Sweden are considered to be easy places to shoplift, certainly for foreign organized crime groups.
I mean, they're bringing... Northampton actually got arrested, I think, as a consequence of or you joined the police when they went in to arrest that ring.
We joined the police on a raid to a different group, a group that were doing the same thing that this group are doing at Morrison's, but to branches of Holland and Barrett. So you see the same modus operandi again and again with different retail.
It's incredible, isn't it? But then it isn't incredible at all. And I don't know how you decide on what projects you're going to pursue, Matt. But your other one is rather different. This is a programme that you've made for BBC Three, and it involves. Actually, I made a little pledge. I've got to find out more about this world because I'm 52 years old. I'm not planning on hanging out my headphones for a couple of years yet. So I need to know more about a world that contains people like Logan Paul.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's closer to my usual type of story. I mean, you last had me on about Andrew Tate, so...
Exactly.
Logan Paul is one of the most famous and financially successful influencers in the world. He's the co-founder of Prime Energy Drinks. His videos have been viewed over, around 6 billion times.
I thought I was viral.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid you aren't compared to Logan Paul. And we were looking at a number of allegations against Logan Paul's crypto activities. So he had a kind of crypto investment game marketed towards children, which many people accuse him of running fraudulently. He denies any wrongdoing and says that he didn't make any money from it. But we did also look at some crypto wallets that appeared that they could be associated with him. And what we found was there was at least one meme coin, which he promoted publicly, and then shortly after he promoted it publicly, a crypto wallet, which was anonymous, but which had previously been paid by his public wallet, which could suggest a connection, profited over $100,000 from it. Now that, some might say, is evidence of him pumping a meme coin and then dumping it to gain money from it. But, he continues to deny any wrongdoing and didn't respond to my allegations about that specific crypto wallet.
You did have a sort of encounter with him, though.
Yes. So I've been asking him for an interview for months. And when I sent him, the letter with the allegations that we would be putting in our film, his PR team invited me to Puerto Rico for an interview. So I went to his boxing gym. I sat down. And I first noticed there was a suspicious number of cameras pointed at me and my crew, and I thought, okay, he's obviously going to film this. And then all of a sudden, a Logan Paul lookalike walks through the door.
And you knew it was a lookalike?
I could tell instantly it was a lookalike, but I did, for a second I thought, sometimes famous people look a lot different in real life.
Yes.
And I thought, if I accuse this person of being a lookalike, and on the off chance it is actually Logan Paul, that would be so offensive. But no, I did very quickly.
That would be viral as well by tea time, wouldn't it?
But yeah, he sent a lookalike to his own interview with the BBC. This is unprecedented territory. We're in a very silly era of history where these influencers, their reaction to allegations being put to them by the BBC is to kind of troll them in this way.
Yeah.
So anyway, the prank kind of fell flat because I was just like, you're not Logan Paul, I'm leaving. And then at that point, he sent a kind of horde of supporters out with megaphones chanting the BBC are pedophiles.
Wow.
And then made his own video about that. And then, shortly after that, Andrew Tate, who I had previously investigated, kind of piled on the trolling of me based on this viral moment that Logan Paul had created, and began essentially pumping meme coins based on me. And I think within a couple hours, to his followers, within a couple hours, the market cap on some of these meme coins was $400,000. I think I would estimate around $2 million worth of meme coins that are making fun of me, pictures of my face, were traded after this happened. So, yeah, we live in a very strange world.
We
now.
do, and I jest about not being as clued up as I should be, but there is some truth in it. I mean, even though Jonathan's been in touch to say you live a great life not knowing about Logan Paul, James, you really don't want to change it. But I do, because this is, as you say, the world of Andrew Tate. Elements of it would also fall under the description of the world of Elon Musk, who is now arguably the second most powerful person in America come January, but certainly with regard to the coins and to influencing and the role that social media plays. And I know this isn't something that you've addressed directly in the programme, in Logan Paul Bad Influence, which you can find on the iPlayer. Their power and importance is stretching far beyond their original spheres of influence.
Absolutely. I mean, should we explain what a meme coin is, first of all?
Why not?
So a meme coin is kind of like a silly cryptocurrency product that has no intrinsic value based on a silly meme. Sometimes the names of these coins are full sentences. Like there's one that's called Matche is a curse word. Basically, a lot of celebrities have been called out for kind of publicly promoting these coins, and then the value of them crashes soon after they sell their investments. But the most popular meme coin is Dogecoin, based on a Shiba Inu dog meme. Elon Musk has called himself the Doge father. He's one of the biggest proponents of Dogecoin. He is now going to run a government department called Doge, the Department of Governmental Efficiency. The memes have won, basically.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
We're increasingly in this world where all of these people, Logan Paul, Andrew Tate, Elon Musk, are generating these viral moments through controversy. Almost the more controversial that the moments are, the more fame they get, and the more fame these investment products get. And so we're entering into this world where increasingly, the metric by which we judge a person or a product is no longer whether it's good, right?
Yeah.
It's whether it's capable of generating hype, whether it's loud.
It's a recalibration of reality.
Exactly. And
it's all linked. I don't want to sound like I've got a conspiracy theory about conspiracy theorists, but it is all, clearly it's all linked because of the parallels you've just drawn between the meme coin world and the next governmental administration in the United States.
Yeah, I really truly think we're about to enter the silliest period of history.
And does it follow from Kellyanne Conway talking about alternative facts? Because for me, that's where the fuse got lit. For if you want to talk about a recalibration of reality, it became government policy for people to be able to choose their own truth, and that kind of runs alongside the world you report on. The traditional political world being corrupted and turned upside down, running alongside the online world that you report on. They need each other.
Absolutely. It's soon going to become an outdated idea to care about how true something is.
Yeah.
Because these social media algorithms, they often do not care how true something is.
Sure.
They care how loud it is, how controversial it is. And those are the stories that get amplified.
And that's the value. That's where the value lies, not in the truth.
Absolutely.
Orwell saw some of this coming, didn't he?
Absolutely. We often talk about how these people radicalize their audiences, right? What we never talk about is how their audiences also kind of radicalize and create them. It's a two-way process. It started with reality television. That's the case for Donald Trump and Andrew Tate. But this process has been amplified through social media. And what I mean by that is all of these people have found a platform, an algorithm, where when they experiment by doing more controversial, outlandish things, their audience reflects that and gives them more attention. So it then radicalizes them back.
To do more.
Exactly.
Fascinating and terrifying. And you're not going to be short of things to report on in the coming years, are you?
I don't think so, no.
No, nor do I. So you can catch both of the programmes that we've been talking about on Channel 4 Dispatches. That's on the Channel 4 player. The Truth About Britain's Shoplifting Epidemic, part of the Dispatches strand, and the Logan Paul programme. What was the Logan Paul programme called again?
Logan Paul, Bad Influence.
Bad Influence, ? Rhetorical.
Yeah.
Matt Shea, thank you. And let us know next time you've got something good in the pipeline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Two absolutely extraordinary stories. And I've got another one for you now. And I know Matt Shea will find this as fascinating as I do, because it moves into similar space. You will be familiar with Emma Corr. She is, of course, LBC's correspondent in the Southeast. But you won't be familiar with the sort of letters that routinely drop through her letterbox. At least I hope you're not. But it was relatively recently, Emma, that you noticed some rather strange envelopes landing on your doormat.
That's right, James. I began investigating this whole story a few months ago because this quite literally landed on my doorstep. I received multiple letters from Companies House claiming that my address had 5 new businesses registered to it, all run by the same Chinese individual. Each company name just had a few letters moved around. They claimed to be selling footwear and perfume, and the occupation of the director was down as a business person for each company. So it was quite obvious these were fraudulent, and I soon discovered 70 companies, all run by Chinese nationals, were registered to 38 houses in this area where I am in West Sussex. That happened in just 1 week, and some residents here even started receiving correspondence then from HMRC and then banks, including Julie Wormsley, who showed me the pile of letters she got through the door.
I say registration numbers, then tax forms, authorisation codes, and then I got a form saying I needed to fill in a tax return. That one was scary.
Now, James, I've learned that this is happening all the time because figures that have been shared with LBC show over 30,000 Chinese companies have registered to a UK address so far this year, and a significant number of those are estimated to be fraudulent. On the whole, they're trading legitimate goods online, but they aren't paying VAT or corporation tax because their tax forms are turning up on people's doorsteps. Finance expert Graham Barrow, who runs the company Risk Alert 247, he tracks suspicious firms popping up in the UK, and we've looked at this together, and he told me in just 1 day this year, almost 800 Chinese businesses registered to British homes, which he feels is likely the work of organised crime networks, and it's really costing the Treasury.
Happening in plain sight, and it's this great unreported crime, because I think the loss of revenue, both VAT and corporation tax, to the UK runs into the hundreds of millions of pounds a year. We are this perfect storm of being viewed as a very low-risk country, very easy to access company registration process, very cheap, and they get away with it.
And it is so easy, James, to set up a company with a UK address. It doesn't require any proof of residency or even a connection to the property being registered. The entire process online through Companies House can take less than 24 hours and comes at a cost of just £50. Now, in response to LBC's findings, MPs are now calling on Companies House to close this tax loophole. I've spoken to someone from the All-Parliamentary Group on Anti-Corruption and Responsible Tax, telling me that Companies House need to get to the bottom of this, saying if it does transpire that these bogus registrations are the work of organised crime groups, then the government will need to step in. Companies House have told me they take fraud seriously and all allegations are fully investigated, and at the moment they're striking off around 3,000 companies a week which they suspect to be fraudulent, which just demonstrates really the scale of the problem, but also the time and the resource being used to tackle this.
Do we know what the margins are? I mean, the ones that are, they're not legit in any meaningful sense, are they? But the ones that are actually conducting business, do we know what sort of sums are involved?
We don't know exactly. Speaking with finance expert Graham Barrow, he's telling me about 30,000 Chinese businesses registered to UK addresses so far this year. The 30,000 he predicts, most of them are going to be bogus because they're picking random empty shops, people's houses they're registering to. In terms of those doing legitimate business, we don't know in terms of those paying tax. I think obviously they are trading legitimate goods, so they are kind of using online sites to kind of get to UK customers,
and they're not paying any tax or VAT on any profits that they make. So what's the appeal for the ones that are opening shells that don't have anything in them?
Well, we don't know. I mean,
I'm deeply confused, Emma. So I'm talking to you as if you're the world expert on this stuff, but you're just the discoverer of it, really.
Well, we think, obviously, some will be trading, as I said, on some online sites, targeting UK customers, so therefore Treasury missing out on tax there. Some of these businesses might be being used for money laundering and kind of other organised crime activities. We can't differentiate exactly which ones are which, but it's quite obvious that a lot of these are fraudulent and aren't paying tax.
It's absolutely bonkers and presumably quite frightening for people like Julie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even myself, when I received that many letters in one go, it was straight onto Companies House to try to deal with it. And then actually raising with kind of local MPs and trying to bring it to government attention because it was so expansive here in this area. And for people, that are elderly perhaps and don't have access to online, online things and trying to sort it out, it was really difficult and really scary. The fact that credit card companies, banks started reaching out was particularly scary.
What, finally, could someone listening to this to whom this has happened or to whose mum it has happened, what should they do if they're getting mail like this through their letterbox?
The first instance is definitely contact Companies House, and you can do that online, of course, but you can also call them to notify them that this is happening. They actually have become quite a lot better at removing these companies in recent times, particularly in recent months. But actually, there's kind of causing another problem now, James, funny enough, because in October there was a big increase in Mexicans registering companies to UK addresses that Chinese individuals used to register companies to. So they're potentially trying to get around it, really, with simply changing their nationality to continue trading. But this is happening all the time. 3 extraordinary stories. I'd hesitate to rank them, but you'd certainly be in a contender for the top spot. Emma Core, thank you, LBC's correspondent in the South East. Actually, before you go, it's a journalist's dream, isn't it? The scoop actually comes through your own letterbox. It really was, James. It really did land on my doorstep, but it's been months in the making. Fascinating stuff.
And clearly some extraordinary hard work as well. You can find out more on the LBC website about this story. And that now will become, it was interesting hearing the expert describe it as unreported, even as it was in the process of becoming unreported, if that's even English, because now Emma's piece on the LBC website will become one of the first things that pops up when people are trying to find out more about this extraordinary practice. You live and learn. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. So download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick will be here, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.